Bursting into the birthing chamber, the young noble rushed to his exhausted wife's bedside as the newborn infant let out her very first cries. Smiling through her fatigue, she urged him to hold their newly born daughter. He listened intently as his wife suggested naming the baby girl Louise, readily agreeing that it was a truly lovely choice. Yet, at that precise moment of joy, a sudden rush of distant memories flooded his mind, awakening the recollections of a past life just as he embraced his new role as a father. His newfound memories revealed the setting of his rebirth to be the grand kingdom of Bernard, a realm defined by protective barriers safeguarding its towns, while perilous dungeons and monsters lurked just beyond. Standing tall in his noble attire, he recognized his current identity as Wolfsang Marius Sontag, head of the prestigious Duke Lehman household. A profound realization took root within him. He had been reincarnated into the world of an Otome fantasy game, placed in the exact role of the father to the story's destined villainess, young Louise. He recalled how, in his former life, he had been an avid gamer who devoured titles across every genre, never hesitating to immerse himself in virtual worlds. Among those many titles, he remembered playing a specific game called Alphon, a typical romance simulator centered around winning the hearts of various handsome suitors. His interest in the title had grown so intense that he even purchased official setting guidebooks, captivated by its unusually demanding dungeon-crawling mechanics that set it apart from standard romance games. He reflected on the game's heroine, a virtuous saintess named Monica, whose journey involved forming bonds with noble suitors while undertaking holy pilgrimages and rigorous training across the realm. He remembered how the heroine was forced to travel frantically across the kingdom to quell dangerous monster outbreaks surging from subterranean dungeons, which served as the core conflict of the world he now inhabited. He recalled the tragic destiny written for his daughter, Louise Lehman, a future where her bitter clashes with Monica over Crown Prince Heinrich would inevitably seal her fate. Ultimately, that terrible path would culminate in the public annulment of her engagement and her banishment from the realm, cementing her ruin as the story's designated villainess. Shifting his thoughts back to the present, however, the immediate reality was far more chaotic as 4-year-old Louise stood before him in floods of tears, screaming her refusal to cooperate. As the household servants hovered nearby in sheer panic, he softly tried to reach out to her, only to be met by her tearful shout that she hated everyone. Crouching down to meet her at eye level, he attempted to soothe the distraught child, gently encouraging her to open up about what was hurting her. Instead of an answer, a stinging slap echoed across his cheek as she lashed out in frustration before collapsing against him in heavy sobs, leaving him to quietly stroke her hair in comfort. Her explosive outburst was rooted in raw sorrow, for only a month prior, his beloved wife Cassandra had succumbed to a sudden epidemic, leaving the little girl calling out hopelessly for her mother while the concerned staff rushed over to inspect his face. Massaging his reddened cheek, he listened quietly as the elderly butler chuckled softly, pointing out that a child's strike born from grief possessed unexpected force. The butler went on to gently advise caution, explaining that the young lady was still finding it immensely difficult to accept the reality of her mother's sudden passing. Determination sharpening his gaze, he steadfastly rejected the suggestion to step back, firmly stating that he had a promise to honor. He knew that in the original story, a noble patriarch would rarely raise a child directly after losing his spouse, maintaining a cold and distant composure instead. Yet he was determined not to become that detached figure in his daughter's life. Determined to act differently from his game counterpart, he called out urgently for young Louise, calling her Lulu. Although memories of his past life had only returned around the time of her birth, his love for her was entirely real. Scanning the spacious, empty grand hallway illuminated by tall arched windows, he found no sign of the young girl anywhere within the corridor. Out of breath and growing increasingly anxious, he paused near the terrace overlook, reasoning that a 4-year-old child could not have wandered beyond the estate gates and must instead be hiding in the garden. Hurrying out into the courtyard, he finally spotted the small figure standing silently among the flower beds. A wave of relief washed over him as he clutching his chest, remembering that her late mother had cherished this very garden, leaving the lonely child to seek comfort where her mother's presence felt strongest. Reaching out a gentle hand toward her, he spoke softly, urging her to come back inside before the chilling air caught up with her and made everyone worry further. But the young girl pulled away, tears welling in her eyes as she burst out that she refused to return to a home where her mother was no longer waiting. Her outburst was cut short when a sudden clatter shattered the quiet as he abruptly collapsed onto his knees, knocking over a metal flower bucket beside him. Overcome by sheer grief and exhaustion, he choked back tears and gasped out his late wife's name. The child stared in shock, trembling as she called out to her weeping father. As they stood together in the quiet garden, bound by shared sorrow, he pondered whether their existence was merely the setting of a game or if their genuine affection transcended any predefined story. He hung his head in agonizing grief, weeping aloud and asking why fate had taken her away. As he sobbed, vivid memories of her bright, joyful voice calling out to him flooded his mind, reminding him of how deeply he had loved her regardless of any predetermined destiny. Bittersweet images of their happiest moments replayed in his thoughts. Their wedding day, holding their newborn daughter together, and her radiant smile, bringing the painful realization that those precious days would never return. Returning to the present, he gently reached out and rested his palm on his daughter's head as they stood together under the warm garden sunlight. Shaken by her father's sudden display of raw emotion, the little girl softly apologized and called him Daddy for the first time in years, catching him completely off guard. With tears welling in her large eyes, she timidly confessed that she had honestly believed he felt no sorrow over her mother's passing. She recounted how on the solemn day of the funeral, while everyone gathered around the coffin to say goodbye, her father had stood stoic without shedding a single tear. Kneeling down to her eye level, he asked if she remembered the vast crowd of guests who had attended that day, listening attentively as she nodded before explaining that dangerous individuals had been among them. He recalled the shadowy political rivals and hostile factions who came to Katie's funeral hoping to undermine the family, forcing him, as acting duke, to hide his heartbreak beneath an unyielding mask. To protect their house from those who sought to exploit their grief, he had been forced to pretend everything was fine, softly admitting that in doing so, he must have appeared to her as a cold and distant father. He gently lifted his daughter into his arms, brushing off her concerns with a warm reassurance that burdensome matters were for him to handle, before steering her excitement toward the hidden sanctuary. In the playful commotion, her flailing hands knocked his glasses askew, prompting a sweet apology from the child. Guiding her through a creaking door into the hidden chamber, he revealed walls lined with framed portraits depicting her mother in various loving moments. The young girl gasped in sheer wonder as her eyes took in the magnificent gallery. Among the artworks hung delicate portraits capturing her mother holding her as an infant, alongside soft, intimate paintings that preserved her gentle smile for eternity. Overjoyed at the sight of her mother everywhere, the young girl exclaimed in delight while he gently patted her head, confessing with a sheepish touch that embarrassment had kept him from showing her this haven earlier. Looking up at him with wide, curious eyes, she realized the truth behind the artwork and asked if he had been embarrassed because every single portrait had been painted by his own hand. Astonished, she sought confirmation if he had truly crafted every single piece, forcing him to sheepishly admit that indeed, all of them were his work. Though he humbly stammered that his artistic skills were modest at best, his daughter's face lit up with absolute awe as she declared the collection truly magnificent. Gazing warmly around the room filled with her mother's presence, she softly observed that it finally felt as though her mother were right there at home with them. Her heartfelt words struck him deeply, catching him off guard as he processed the impact of her emotional realization. A soft, deeply affectionate smile washed over his face, replaced by profound peace as he looked upon his cherished daughter. He quietly recalled how drawing had become a habit out of sheer necessity since his previous life, though he was glad his initial portrait of his daughter had turned out well. Flattered and eager, she demanded to keep it in her room, leading him to offer to paint an even smaller, brand-new piece just for her. Building on that promise, he suggested painting a miniature portrait that she could carry with her everywhere, which sparked an even grander idea, setting the tiny likeness inside a locket pendant. As she pondered the logistics of crafting something so small without a tiny brush, her thoughts shifted, and she curiously asked why there were no paintings in the gallery showing her father and mother together. Softening at her innocent request, He listened as she boldly insisted on a portrait with both parents side by side, warning him not to complain about his skill since she simply wanted them together. Deeply touched by her earnest wish, he gently reminded her of her earlier apology to him, asking if there was someone else in the estate she still needed to reconcile with, to which she solemnly agreed. With her resolve set, he patted her head affectionately and instructed her to visit his office once she finished her rounds, watching her run off with a gentle smile. Shortly after returning to his desk, the chief butler brought in fresh coffee, sharing that the young lady was currently going around apologizing to all the servants for her recent outbursts, noting how difficult Katie's passing had been for the entire household. Listening to the butler's observations, he reflected in silence on his unique background from a modern Japanese nuclear family, feeling that the rigid expectations of nobility and living surrounded by servants made true peace elusive. Putting those heavy thoughts aside, he admitted to his loyal servant that he only wished he had taken his daughter to the secret room sooner, comforted by the genuine happiness she had shown. Pleased by his master's visible relief, the butler noted that he too seemed to have gained some peace of mind, though he was met with a mild reprimand for calling him young master once again. He drifted into a quiet recollection, hearing her gentle voice call out his nickname softly in the glowing calm. In this memory, he stood beside her bedside while she lay weak next to their sleeping daughter. She gently scolded him for neglecting his health, worrying about his habit of pushing himself beyond his limits. Even as their little girl murmured in her sleep, she softly insisted that she wasn't straining herself, attempting to reassure him despite her failing strength. With tears welling behind his spectacles, he confessed how deeply anxious he felt, fearing that if anything happened to her, he would be unable to carry on without her. She let out a soft chuckle at his vulnerability, teasingly calling him a crybaby, to which he flusteredly admitted that he only ever showed such weakness in her presence. Her gaze turned serious as she softly requested that he bring his face closer, preparing to ask him one final, crucial favor. She pleaded with him to ensure their daughter would never be left alone even after her death, but he desperately pleaded for her not to speak of dying, reminding her of their promise to take a family picnic together when spring arrived. Overwhelmed by heartbreak, he clung to the memory of their shared dream to raise their daughter together and watch her grow side by side. Her faint voice echoed in his memory one last time, calling his name softly across the fading dream. With a serene smile, she gently rested her hand on their daughter's head, leaving him with a sacred charge to protect the child with all his heart. Her memory stayed with him as he renewed his solemn promise to protect their young daughter with everything he had, knowing he was the only one left to guard her future. Returning to the present, the office door creaked open as the little girl wandered back inside, greeted warmly by both her father and the elderly butler. Prompted by the butler's gentle encouragement, she timidly explained that she had properly apologized for striking her father earlier, fidgeting nervously as she spoke. Brimming with newfound determination, she declared with a beaming smile that she would study as hard as she could, also she could grow up to help him. Overwhelmed with tenderness, he smiled brightly with tears glistening in his eyes, silently telling his late wife how much their little girl was growing before thanking her aloud. To break up the emotional moment, the butler offered her some fresh juice that had been prepared for her, causing her eyes to sparkle with pure delight as she happily accepted. As he gazed upon his precious daughter, the irreplaceable keepsake left by his beloved wife, he inwardly vowed to shatter any tragic fate that threatened to ruin her, opening his arms and calling her over to him. With a soft, loving expression, he waited patiently for her to rush into his arms. She eagerly sprang forward, throwing herself into her father's warm embrace without hesitation. In a quiet room, young Louise received a lesson on proper aristocratic etiquette, carefully practicing her curtsy under gentle guidance. Watching her attempt the formal greeting, her father's stern demeanor melted away entirely, replaced by a foolishly adoring smile. His younger brother teased him about his complete lack of composure whenever Louise was involved, remarking that he always turned into a doting softy around her, causing him to instantly snap back to his sharp, unamused demeanor. As they sat down together for tea, the mood grew slightly more reflective while they discussed their shared past, recalling how the loss of their parents 11 years prior had left only the two brothers and young Louise as their immediate bloodline. Clearing his throat to shift the mood, the younger brother requested that he listen seriously for a moment, urging him to set aside his usual fatherly doting because he had an important favor to ask. Taking a calm sip of his tea before the request was even voiced, he immediately shot it down, declaring that if it pertained to stepping into the role of household head, the answer was an absolute rejection. Outraged by the instant refusal, the younger man protested loudly, demanding to know why his brother continued to act as the ducal proxy when he himself was the legitimate heir to the Lehman house. The arrangement had been established long ago. While the younger heir was still a minor, the elder had stepped in as proxy head of the ducal house, with the understanding that once the youth reached 18, the proxy duty would end, and he would instead take up their late father's title of Count Zonder. Fixing his brother with a firm, penetrating gaze, he quietly questioned whether the youth truly understood why their parents had chosen not to hand the ducal title to him as the eldest son in the first place. He sat quietly as Marcus earnestly argued that despite Wolfgang's inability to cast magic, his administrative talent far outweighed that limitation, especially since Marcus lacked magic as well. Because in this kingdom, high nobility and royalty were expected to possess vast mana pools and command advanced spells as a matter of course. Although Wolfgang had been praised in early childhood for his exceptional mana capacity, it was revealed by age 10 that his body could not activate even basic barrier magic. As a result, their parents deemed him a failure and birthed Marcus to inherit the ducal title. Yet after their father's death, Wolfgang stepped up to lead the duchy for over a decade. Hearing this truth, Marcus protested anxiously, explaining that the populace revered Wolfgang and that replacing him abruptly would cause immense confusion. Reassuring his younger brother, Wolfgang explained that he intended to pass on his duties gradually over 2 to 3 years, right as little Louise burst in to greet her uncle. Following her cheerful entry, the young girl performed a cute curtsy in her ruffled dress, announcing that she had finished her lessons early upon hearing of his arrival. Charmed by her endearing behavior, both brothers immediately melted, completely overwhelmed by her sweetness. Joining them at the table, Louise asked what they were talking about, and Marcus proudly replied that he was telling her how impressive Wolfgang was despite lacking magic. Curious about his condition, Louise questioned if her father's special flame counted as magic, leaving Wolfgang to reflect thoughtfully on his unusual ocular power from his student days. He reflected on the nature of his ability, a rare ocular power where flame erupts wherever his gaze focuses. Turning to her, Marcus questioned why such flame generation wasn't recognized as magic despite sharing the same underlying mana principles, though Louise noted others found the gaze unsettling. Adjusting his spectacles, Wolfgang explained that he mastered suppressing the trait around age 17, relying on his glasses to prevent accidental ignitions. As they sat around the tea table, Louise thoughtfully pondered how he might disguise the ability to look like standard spellcasting. She excitedly suggested he use a magic wand or adopt striking poses from storybooks, which Marcus enthusiastically backed as a way to mimic chantless high-tier spellcasters. Moved to tears by her earnest effort to help him, the overwhelmed brother embraced his emotional state while Marcus called him out. Unfazed, Louise struck a cheerful pose to demonstrate her idea of a cool wizard stance. Blushing in embarrassment at the ridiculousness of adopting a special pose, Wolfgang nonetheless agreed to initiate their strategic discussion on demonstrating his power. Smirking, Marcus urged him to use this trick to prove wrong everyone who had ever belittled his lack of traditional magic. When Marcus envisioned this breakthrough restoring Wolfgang's claim to the ducal succession, Wolfgang swiftly shut down the idea, firmly refusing to pursue the title. Having reclaimed his noble birthright from his younger brother, he elevated his daughter, Louise, to the status of a duke's daughter. Days later, as Marcus offered words of encouragement, the young girl bounced with joyful energy beside her father. Soon after, he attended a high society tea gathering, where noble women chatted about the thriving Zonder domain and its recent innovations. He reflected on how memories of his previous life proved surprisingly useful, all while accompanying Louise to an afternoon tea hosted by the Fisher family for young Emma. Lady Fisher warmly addressed the young girls, calling them charming little ladies and reminding them gently to keep their fine dresses clean. Excited to play with her new companion, Louise waved goodbye. While he smiled warmly, and encouraged her to enjoy herself. With the children running off, the surrounding noble women turned their attention toward him, whispering admiring comments about his striking appearance. Sweating nervously under their gaze, he realized the agonizing awkwardness of being the sole adult male at a young girl's social gathering. Seeing his discomfort, Lord Fisher offered to step in so Wolfgang could escape, though Lady Fisher promptly interjected to keep him present. Trapped surrounded by aristocratic ladies, he sat rigidly in his chair, questioning why he had been placed in such an utterly foreign environment. He sat quietly as the noble women expressed their sympathy, murmuring about how tragic his wife Cassandra's passing had been. As they recalled how fond the couple had been of each other, he maintained a composed facade behind his gentle smile. Expressing his gratitude, he replied that after 2 full years, things had finally settled into a peaceful routine. The ladies gently pressed on, noting his youth and suggesting that little Louise must still feel lonely without a mother. Sipping his tea, he realized that relaxing his focus for even a second would open the door for unwanted remarriage proposals. To steer the topic away, he mentioned that he had taken up painting to comfort his daughter, instantly sparking their curiosity. The women gasped in excitement over his artistic talents, leaving him internally groaning at his own blunder. He hastily claimed his work was amateurish, but they insisted on scheduling the next tea party at his estate to inspect the art. Suddenly, a piercing shriek shattered the peaceful atmosphere, snapping everyone's attention away from the conversation. Across the sunlit courtyard, a young girl ran toward her mother in distress, disturbing the noble gathering. She was suddenly seized from above by a massive flying beast, its sharp talons grasping her as it swooped down without warning. Her mother shrieked her name in utter horror, while Wolfgang stared in disbelief, stunned that a monster capable of flight could appear in a peaceful place like this. Amidst the lingering panic, Lady Fisher wrung her hands in despair, her voice trembling as she cried out for her daughter. Wolfgang quickly urged restraint, warning that casting untargeted magic now could accidentally harm young Emma in the crossfire. Yet the mother's panic only mounted as she watched the airborne threat carry her child further away. Stepping ahead with calm resolve, he adjusted his stance and instructed the frantic noblewoman to leave the rescue entirely in his hands. Tracking the colossal feathered beast soaring through the sky, he immediately hailed a nearby knight, directing him to position himself directly beneath the monster's flight path, knowing a fall from such a height would be fatal. He commanded the guard to prepare to catch Lady Emma the moment she was freed, and the loyal knight barked back his immediate, firm compliance. High above, the young girl screamed out in terror as she dangled helplessly from the creature's talons. Focusing his intent, Wolfgang tapped into the precision of his specialized magic, which allowed him to incinerate only the target within his line of sight without harming the child. Fixating his piercing gaze upon the flying beast, he clenched his fist with unyielding focus and uttered the command to burn. With a deafening screech, the massive monster instantly erupted into a fiery vortex, vaporizing in midair and releasing its captive. Hurtling toward the ground with a shrill cry, Emma fell right into the waiting arms of the guard knight, who caught her securely as her mother sprinted forward in relief. Reunited in a tearful embrace, Lady Fisher held her precious daughter tightly against her chest, while nearby, Wolfgang observed the scene with relief, noting that the young girl appeared miraculously uninjured. Suddenly, a wave of cold anxiety washed over him as his thoughts turned to his own child, shouting out for Lulu and frantically wondering where she could have vanished to amidst the chaos. He frantically calls out for Lulu, his heart pounding with fear that she might have disappeared in the chaos. Relieved to spot her trembling nearby, he kneels to offer gentle comfort, reassuring her that the beast is gone and checking for injuries. Gazing up at him with sparkling eyes, the young girl exclaims in pure awe at how amazing he was. She excitedly waves her hands, explaining he executed the exact move Uncle Marcus had described, leaving him caught off guard. Deeply touched by her glowing praise, he smiles warmly and thanks her, expressing how much it means to be a father she can be proud of. Shifting his focus back to the emergency, he wonders how a dungeon monster could reach the capital given the powerful barrier protecting the realm. Lord Fisher hurries over to him, breathless and overwhelmed with gratitude for rescuing his daughter Emma. Fisher then reveals the broader danger, explaining that a second beast-like monster appeared near the stables and attacked his eldest daughter. Stunned by the news of multiple attacks, he listens closely as Fisher details how reports arrived of monsters simultaneously spawning in both locations. Fisher notes that knowing he was securing the garden allowed him to rush to the stables without hesitation as they assessed their next move. He stood quietly as Lord Fisher lowered his head in deep appreciation, admitting that without intervention, either of the young girls might have perished. Wolfgang gently urged the Lord to rise, reassured simply by the fact that the children were unharmed. The nobleman went on to explain that, according to the physician's evaluation, both children had suffered only minor scratches that would leave no lasting scars, a relief that settled heavily between them. This revelation sparked a memory in Wolfgang's mind, recalling how in the original timeline, Lady Emma was meant to bear a prominent facial scar, a tragic remnant from an event occurring long before the main story unfolded. In that forgotten narrative, a monster attack in the High Gardens had caused the young girl to fall, leaving her permanently marked. Yet now that gruesome fate had been completely rewritten. He weighed the full gravity of the shift. Had he not been present, he would have been elsewhere, leaving the family to suffer devastating losses. One sister broken in spirit and another losing a limb, instead of escaping with mere superficial wounds. The exhilarating truth hit him. His deliberate actions possessed the power to actively alter the future, a hope that shone brightly as the joyful children rushed over to reunite with their mother. Little Emma bravely wiped away her tears, declaring she was completely fine, while her mother tearfully expressed her immense gratitude, knowing that rash magical retaliation could have led to catastrophe. He remained modest, brushing off their praise by admitting he had simply acted on instinct, uncertain if he could have maintained such composure had his own beloved Lulu been in immediate danger. Though Lord Fisher acknowledged the alarming nature of monsters infiltrating a noble residence so near the capital, everyone agreed that the primary reason for joy was the safety of the two young girls. Watching Lulu beam with pure happiness, a glimmer of light appeared in the once grim outlook for her future, signaling the beginning of a brand new path forward. Wolfgang bows deeply, expressing his immense gratitude to Lord Fisher and his wife for their hospitalities and unwavering assistance. He quickly gestures for him to raise his head, reassuring Wolfgang that such formal gratitude is unnecessary given their prior exchanges. Wolfgang insists passionately that he was merely fulfilling his duty as representative of the Zonder household. Meanwhile, young Louise offers a sincere apology for causing any fright during the ordeal, assuring everyone that she is quite fine before politely inquiring about the well-being of Emma and Renata. Lady Fisher chuckles warmly at the girl's boundless vitality, amused by how quickly children recover, while Marcus manages a pouting Louise nearby. Lord Fisher notes with relief that Renata has fully recovered, commending how calmly everyone handled the sudden monster attack, as widespread panic would have led to disaster. Observing Wolfgang's proud expression when speaking of his family, Lord Fisher fondly teases him about being an overly doting father, a badge Wolfgang accepts with an affectionate, self-assured smirk. Nearby, Louise gazes up at Wolfgang with wide, admiring eyes, enthralled by the heroic impression her father leaves upon everyone around them. As Lady Fisher dotes on Louise, expressing how wonderful it is to have older siblings to rely on, Marcus listens with a bemused expression, pondering the intricate dynamics of their family structure. Extending a warm invitation, Lady Fisher suggests they gather for tea again once everyone has settled down, promising that both Emma and Renata will be delighted to host them. At the mention of his valiant effort in vanquishing the monster, Wolfgang finds himself flustered by the overwhelming praise, especially when Louise triumphantly beams, boasting aloud about how cool her father truly is. As she listened quietly beside them, her father adjusted his glasses and smoothly shifted the conversation, asking Lord Fisher if the root cause of the monster outbreak had finally been uncovered. The concern was well-founded. News of the sudden monster assault inside the Marquis's estate had already sent shockwaves throughout the entire kingdom. Given that the capital's outskirts were protected by a powerful magical barrier, a breach deep within a noble mansion represented a critical threat to national security. In response to the grave inquiry, Lord Fisher shook his head with a somber expression, revealing that an urgent investigation had uncovered a disturbing detail. One of his family's primary barrier stones had been destroyed. The revelation stunned her father, whose sharp eyes widened behind his spectacles as the noble lord grimly added that the stone had not simply failed on its own, but had been deliberately sabotaged by an unknown perpetrator. Such sabotage carried dire consequences, as these magical barrier stones, imbued with high concentrations of mana to repel dangerous beasts, served as the primary defense for nobles who routinely placed smaller stones within their private estates. As Lord Fisher explained that an emergency summit of nobles was summoned for the following day to inspect the capital's defense perimeter, the young girls interjected with worried questions, prompting a flurry of earnest reassurances from the adults amidst the rising tension. Turning to comfort his little girl, Wolfgang smiled warmly alongside his host, offering gentle reassurance that she had nothing to fear with the adults handling the situation. By the following morning, preparations for the crucial noble assembly were underway, and her father stood quietly as his elderly butler helped him drape a heavy, ornate ceremonial coat over his shoulders. While the loyal manservant complimented his master on how distinguished he looked in formal attire, recalling his younger days, the head of the house merely grumbled internally about how stiff and uncomfortable the heavy uniform felt, just before a gentle knock sounded at the chamber door. When she bounced into the room with a cheerful morning greeting, she gasped in delight and surprise at the sight of her father looking exceptionally regal in his full aristocratic uniform. He noticed his young daughter staring at him in utter awe, her hands covering her mouth as she remarked on how different and majestic he looked in his formal attire. The elderly butler concurred, noting how rarely the lord donned such dress uniform, while the little girl puffed her cheeks in concern, wondering if her reaction was inappropriate. Breaking into a radiant smile, she quickly clarified that she was simply startled by how handsomely dashing her father appeared. Overwhelmed by her sheer innocence, the young lord pressed a hand to his brow, silently praising his daughter as a literal angel while the butler looked on with amusement. Straightening up, the little girl earnestly cheered him on, encouraging him to do his best at work so that their friends and neighbors could feel safe and secure once more. Moved by her heartfelt words, he offered a reassuring smile and promised to carry out his duty before taking his leave, as she watched him depart with newfound resolve. As his horse-drawn carriage clattered along the cobblestone road toward the royal capital, the weight of nobility hung heavy over the realm, where aristocrats possessed superior magic and bore the solemn obligation to replenish the barrier stones protecting the kingdom from monsters. Reflecting on this divine responsibility, he recalled that those with exceptional magic were revered as saints, much like his father, the former Duke Lehman, whereas his own rank was merely that of an auxiliary substitute. Gazing out the carriage window with a resolute expression, he knew that the presence of such individuals was vital to the kingdom's survival, especially now that dark forces threatened the peace. Arriving at the Grand Castle, he stepped into the bustling assembly hall, where whispered murmurs spread among the gathered lords as the announcer formally presented him as the representative proxy for House Lehman. He immediately recoiled at the sound of a familiar, irritating voice calling out behind him. Turning around, he found Duke Peter Berunt, who casually greeted him, noting how rarely the Lehman family proxy ever attended these formal evening gatherings. Inwardly groaning, the dark-haired noble endured the man's presence, recognizing him as the current head of the Berunt dukedom, a man he privately nicknamed Pebble. Peter dramatically lamented that since Wolfgang's younger brother had taken over official duties, their encounters had grown far too rare for his liking. Wolfgang offered a cold, detached response, asking if Peter was confusing him with someone more agreeable. He recalled with annoyance how Peter had persistently badgered him since their academy days, entirely unbothered by Wolfgang's obvious disdain. Ignoring the sharp dismissal, Peter feigned deep sorrow over his cold reception, dramatically questioning if Wolfgang felt no loneliness at all. Meanwhile, the clear sound of a trumpet echoed across the hall, signaling that the formal proceedings were about to commence. Seizing the opportunity, the Lehman proxy gestured toward the assembly hall, curtly advising Lord Berunt to take his assigned seat before the meeting officially opened. Light-heartedly waving goodbye, Peter promised they would catch up again once the council adjourned. Watching him depart, Wolfgang grumbled under his breath, deeply annoyed at being treated like a rare spectacle drawn out by the fanfare. As the surrounding nobles began taking their seats with a chorus of scraping chairs, Wolfgang made a firm mental resolve to slip away quietly the very moment the meeting concluded, hoping to avoid another encounter with Berunt. Suddenly, a herald's voice boomed across the chamber, announcing the grand entrance of the king. Silence fell over the room as the heavy wooden doors swung open, and the assembled aristocrats immediately stood and pressed their hands to their chests in reverence. The Grand Assembly Hall stood in solemn majesty as His Majesty walked up the central dais toward the royal throne, framed by heavy drapery and the crests of the realm under the watchful eyes of the nobility. Reaching the dais, the monarch turned to face his gathered subjects and warmly bade them to raise their heads, signaling the official start of the emergency summit. He thanked the assembled nobles for gathering on such short notice before addressing the grave matter at hand, the recent monster attack on Margrave Fisher's estate. The king announced that investigation had confirmed the estate's barrier stone was deliberately destroyed, prompting him to order an immediate inspection of the protective stones across all noble domains. Hearing this revelation, Wolfgang digested the troubling news that barrier stones had been shattered across several other high noble households as well. This proved the attack on the Fisher family was no isolated incident, yet none of the targeted domains had reported any malfunctions with their protective area locks beforehand. Because of this alarming pattern, he realized the situation was far more dangerous than expected. The magic of an area lock render both physical and magical attacks completely ineffective within its range, as law strictly dictates their use to prevent human tampering with barrier stones. For the stones to be destroyed, the culprit must have somehow disarmed the area locks, a feat thought to be impossible. As he recalled the mechanics of such security, he reflected on how every household sets its own unique release method upon installing an area lock. Whether through specific incantations, sung melodies, or unique gestures, the keys to these barriers vary wildly from one noble family to another. Meanwhile, quiet murmurs rippled through the assembly hall as the nobles considered the strict secrecy surrounding these protocols. The disarming methods were tightly guarded secret traditions passed down only by word of mouth, and any failed attempt to disarm an area lock was engineered to immediately send a warning alert to the house. Faced with these facts, Wolfgang felt a cold sweat break out as he pondered the chilling contradiction. While a single breach might be explained by a leaked secret, bypassing multiple distinct area locks across several high noble houses seemed utterly impossible through normal means. Sensing the growing unease, the monarch spoke up to confirm that there was no apparent pattern or known cause linking the targeted households. He urged everyone in attendance to stay vigilant and report any suspicious anomaly immediately, no matter how insignificant it might seem. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, Baron Hoffman raised his hand to request permission to address the gathered lords. He reported that among the noble houses affected by the recent incidents, a strange pattern had emerged during their private discussions. He explained that during the periodic trade exchange at Elia Rock, the merchant arriving with new shipments had uttered a remarkably peculiar phrase to his household staff. Recounting the merchant's suspicious well-wishes, he revealed that other impacted lords had received identical remarks from entirely different traders, sparking a wave of uneasy whispers across the gallery. With the formal session coming to a close, the monarch instructed everyone to confirm the details with their retainers before adjourning. As the crowd began to scatter, Fisher stepped beside Wolfgang, subtly referring to his role as the acting representative of Lehman. As they walked down the corridor, he confessed that his own delivery from Elia Rock had contained the exact same eerie phrasing. He listened intently, reflecting on how easily such words could be mistaken for ordinary court pleasantries. Their conversation was abruptly cut short when Duke Berunt charged toward them with dramatic concern. The flamboyant nobleman loudly asked if Wolfgang's estate was intact, dramatically lamenting the chaos despite his own domains remaining completely untouched. Continuing his energetic tirade, he wondered aloud who could possibly be behind such scheme. Announcing his intent to gather intelligence on the matter, the young duke prepared to take his leave just as quickly as he had arrived. Dashing down the hallway with boisterous laughter, he called back that they would catch up at the upcoming evening banquet. Fisher watched him go with a slight smile, offering a sheepish apology for the Duke's notoriously overwhelming personality. Turning back to Wolfgang, he noted with amusement how rare it was to see him express genuine annoyance, marveling at the fact that someone managed to pierce his cool composure. Wolfgang grimaced, quietly dismayed that his exasperation had been so obvious. Fisher reflected on whether Klegel, an old classmate from his academy days, harbored resentment regarding Wolfgang's status as acting duke. Wolfgang remained thoughtful, weighing his ally's words while considering the hidden motives at play within the court. He resolved that for future formal gatherings, Marcus would attend alone as Earl of Zonder, allowing him to retreat into seclusion and avoid further encounters with Duke Berunt. Shortly after, at the Lehman estate, Duke Berunt made himself entirely at home, calling out nonchalantly to his host. When the elder butler offered a warm refill of black tea, the visiting duke accepted with easy, enthusiastic gratitude. Observing this relaxed demeanor, he found the visitor's conduct and motives deeply perplexing. He questioned why the energetic young duke had chosen to linger at their residence rather than returning to his own affairs. As their conversation returned to the recent strange events, Marcus revealed that Klegel had heard the same mysterious phrase from an academy instructor upon entering Elia Rock. The discussion grew serious as they considered the realm's heavy reliance on barrier stones, acknowledging the catastrophic risk if a barrier broke unnoticed and allowed monsters to invade. Reviewing the reports, he noted that the victims lacked any obvious commonality in rank or region, making a thorough inspection of every barrier stone across the territory necessary. Suddenly, a critical insight struck him. While merchants across the land bought magic tools produced in Elia Rock, the common element might not be the buyers themselves. He pressed the point to Marcus, proposing that even if different merchants purchased the barrier stones, they might all be using the exact same shipping carrier to move them. He listened as his younger brother eagerly offered to double-check the information through the academy headmaster, before deciding that he himself would write letters to both Lord Fisher and Pebble to investigate further. However, his plan to reach out by letter was immediately rendered moot when Duke Berunt unexpectedly made a personal appearance at the estate, relaxing on the couch and enjoying a fresh cup of tea while complimenting its quality. The uninvited guest had completely brushed off any suggestion of simply corresponding by mail, stubbornly insisting that he travel in person despite knowing how busy his host was. Exhausted by the young duke's sheer persistence, he let out a heavy sigh, deeply regretting the moment he had given in to the noble's relentless badgering. The visitor dramatically complained about traveling all the way to answer his inquiries, prompting the master of the house to bitterly point out that he had never requested an in-person visit and was tired of the grandiloquent chatter. Refusing to play along with the noble's playful attempts at a psychological battle of wits, the head of the house sternly demanded that the duke state his business quickly and leave, noting that neither of them had time to waste. Their tense exchange was abruptly interrupted by a gentle knock on the reception room door, followed by a polite voice asking permission to step inside. Turning toward the doorway, the host recognized his young daughter standing nervously behind the maid, who offered a swift apology for disturbing their conversation with a guest. The little girl timidly explained that she wished to greet the visiting nobleman, leaving her father torn between his desire to shield her from the eccentric duke and his reluctance to deny her polite request. Ultimately giving in to his daughter's wishes, he asked if the visitor would mind receiving a formal greeting, to which the young duke enthusiastically agreed with a radiant smile. He watched with delight as young Louise performed a flawless, picture-perfect curtsy, introducing herself with utmost formality as Wolfgang's daughter. In response to her overwhelming charm, the duke clutched his face in sheer adoration, unable to contain his excitement at how refined she was, while the elderly butler watched the scene unfold with quiet amusement. Kneeling down to her eye level, he introduced himself warmly as Peter Berunt, explaining that he held the title of Duke and was an old childhood friend of her father, leaving Wolfgang utterly bewildered in the background. Curious, the little girl inquired if that meant from their days back at the academy, to which he enthusiastically confirmed her guess with a bright nod. He went even further, proudly declaring to the child that he was her father's one and only best friend, while Wolfgang stared on in utter disbelief at such a bold claim. Puffing out his chest with satisfaction, he soaked in the moment, completely ignoring Wolfgang's silent panic as the latter desperately questioned when they had ever become close enough to be called best friends. Taking a seat, he cordially invited her to join him for tea so he could regale her with stories of her parents' school days, a proposition she accepted with gleaming eyes and overwhelming excitement. As dusk fell over the grand estate, Wolfgang reflected on how their unexpected guest ended up staying until evening simply because Louise was so eager to listen, acknowledging that the lively conversation had made time fly by. Noticing the late hour, the Duke reluctantly rose from the sofa, expressing his regret that he had to take his leave for the day despite enjoying their time together. Before he departed, young Louise looked up and sweet-talked him into promising to share more stories about her father and mother during his next visit, to which he joyfully agreed without hesitation. He receives a radiant farewell from young Louise, who beams with bright gratitude and cheerfully wishes Lord Berunt a fond farewell as she bows alongside her attendant. Once the child is out of earshot, Wolfgang admits his surprise to his guest, pointing out how closely Berunt must have watched him and Kathy during their academy days to remember so many intimate details. Wolfgang adds with growing unease that he has no memory of them spending anywhere near that much time together. Berunt merely smirks with calm confidence, replying softly that even if he had been right beside Wolfgang in the academy of his memories, Wolfgang still would not have recognized him. The unsettling words strike Wolfgang like a sudden blow, sending a chill through his heart as his eye widens in shock behind his lens. Standing before the acting Duke, Berunt presses a hand to his chest and delivers the chilling truth. Wolfgang remembers his name, but has no recollection of his actual face. Leaning in with a sharp, knowing gaze, Peter confronted Wolfgang about a strange inconsistency, pointing out that while the acting Duke remembered his title, he clearly did not recognize his face. Despite his playful smile, the visiting noble carried an undeniable authority, prompting the troubled host to remember that beneath this casual exterior lay a sharp and formidable Duke's proxy. Startled by how easily his secret had been breached, he slumped back against the couch, openly demanding to know how such a realization had been made. In response, his guest casually relaxed into his seat, explaining that he had found the acting Duke's behavior peculiar ever since their academy days, specifically his habit of keeping everyone at a distance. He continued to break down the pattern, noting how the young lord never initiated conversations and would only shift his demeanor mid-dialogue after a name like Berunt or Pebble was dropped. Breathing heavily and breaking into a cold sweat under the interrogation, he flinched as his guest pointedly asked if he had truly been unable to recognize his identity until he explicitly stated his name. Taking a slow sip from his teacup, the clever noble lightly remarked that his former classmate hadn't been very good at hiding his flaw back in school, while the young host cursed the man's unervingly sharp memory. Behind his calm facade lay a painful truth he had carried all his life. He suffered from severe face blindness, perceiving human facial features as nothing more than blurred, unrecognizable smears. Because he could not even recognize the faces of his own mother and father, his family had deemed him unfit, withholding both the ducal title and their inherited magic from him. It was only years later that the royal court magician identified the underlying cause, revealing that his inability to process faces stemmed directly from his extraordinary flame demon eye. He reflected on how his flame demon eye incinerated anything his visual recognition truly registered, forcing him to unconsciously avoid recognizing people's faces to keep them safe from its destructive power. It was a delicate, constant effort to ensure he did not accidentally burn anyone to ashes. Breaking through his thoughts, Peter pointed out how everything changed when Lady Cassandra took action. Despite already being betrothed, they had treated each other like complete strangers when they first entered the academy. Yet Cassandra persisted without giving up, repeatedly reaching out even when met with cold indifference. With enthusiastic energy, he added that Cassandra was the first and only person whose name Wolfgang had ever spoken aloud during their entire time at the academy, where he had previously refused to call anyone by name. Moved almost to tears by his own romantic recounting, he admitted how touched he had been watching them, while his companion could only stare back in quiet, unnerved disbelief at just how closely his every move had been scrutinized. When asked what point he was trying to make, The vibrant young duke leaned forward with an impeccably bright smile, gently requesting that Wolfgang remember his face as well. Taken aback by the sudden request, the noble adjusted his glasses and questioned how someone could claim to care so much about a friend whose face they couldn't even remember. But Peter merely smiled back, declaring there was nothing strange about calling him a friend at all. Sitting across from one another in the quiet room, Peter reflected on how Wolfgang's past actions had saved him, leaving the dark-haired aristocrat quietly bewildered by the unexpected gratitude. Realizing how late it had gotten, he prepared to take his leave, asking Wolfgang to pass along his warm regards to Louise before stepping out into the hallway and leaving his host alone with his thoughts. Meanwhile, memory turned back to the precise time when two unusually strong men, a father and son with dark hair and dark eyes, had been temporarily hired in the area, a detail connected to the subtle shifts altering their fate. As the eccentric guest departed with a cheerful wave, Wolfgang suddenly gasped in realization. He had forgotten the primary purpose of his visit altogether. Striding down the grand corridor, he grumbled to himself about how thoroughly Wolfgang had enjoyed mocking him, while Marcus watched his animated departure in silence. Leaving the hallway behind, the acting duke returned to his quiet chambers and paused before a gallery of framed portraits, drawn by the memories Peter had carelessly stirred. He remembered Kathy vividly. She had been his betrothed, whom he had initially avoided out of fear that his cursed sight would incinerate her face. Yet she had refused to abandon him, gently taking his hand to offer her unwavering support. Contemplating the delicate silhouette on the wall, he recalled how he had eventually overcome the tragic limitation of his gaze through the medium of paint. Driven by the desire to keep her image close without danger, he had laboriously rendered portrait after portrait, until her soft features became recognizable to his eye. Gazing fondly at the finished likeness of his beloved holding their infant child, he smiled through his spectacles and quietly reaffirmed his vow to cherish their young daughter. Shifting his focus from past grief to pressing duty, he sat down at the edge of his bed to analyze the crucial intelligence Peter had delivered concerning the magical beast attack. According to the gathered records, an unusual pair consisting of a rugged man and a dark-haired, dark-eyed youth had been temporarily hired by a transport company right when the incidents began. Intrigued by this suspicious clue, he pondered whether these unfamiliar figures were crucial operatives orchestrating the crisis from behind the curtains. He recalled the details from the game world, where 5 distinct figures were central to the story. Among them were 2 dark characters affiliated with an underground assassin guild, one of noble birth named Carl, and another raised as an orphan in the slums. Considering how unusual dark hair and eyes were in this realm compared to the prevalent vibrant shades, he calculated the current timeline. The young girl beside him was currently only 6 years old, 5 years younger than her eventual counterpart in the game. Reflecting on the scale of recent events, he reasoned that the secret assassin guild, operating behind the front of a capital information broker, might already be pulling strings, even if Carl was not originally destined to join them until 15. As their horse-drawn carriage navigated the paved streets of the capital past grand architectural facades, he turned to the child sitting across from him, addressing her with serious intent, instructing her firmly not to leave his side under any circumstances until they returned home. The little girl looked up at him with wide, bright eyes and gave a cheerful, determined affirmation. He went on to advise her that she might witness something shocking today, but stressed that she must remain completely calm, to which she eagerly pledged her obedience once more. Relying on his memories of the game's events, he arranged to visit the capital orphanage where Carl was known to reside during this period. Having sent advance word offering a substantial monetary contribution, his request for a visit had been accepted without hesitation, as charitable gifts to sanctuaries were viewed with great favor. Even though his cursed sight rendered normal faces unrecognizable, his vivid recollection of the game's characters allowed him to bypass this limitation, convincing him that he would instantly recognize young Carl on sight. He recalled how Carl was portrayed in the game as a mild-mannered boy who turned into a merciless, lethal assassin during combat, a dangerous transformation he was determined to prevent before the youth strayed down a path of crime. As his carriage rattled along the city streets, he pondered his true motives, hoping to persuade Carl to use his lethal talents to protect young Lulu. Even if asking a dangerous assassin to play guardian felt overly optimistic. Altering the game's original storyline so drastically was a massive gamble, yet for Lulu's sake, he was fully prepared to rewrite fate itself, no matter the consequences. Deep within the bustling streets of the Hein district, a realm far removed from the pristine halls of high nobility, the harsh reality of urban poverty hung thick in the air. Wolfgang made his way through the crowded thoroughfares, quietly observing the grim conditions of the capital's lower quarter. Disguising his noble attire under a simple hooded cloak, he walked alongside little Louise, deeply troubled by the rising crime rates in these neglected neighborhoods where effective solutions remained elusive. He hesitated to bring such a young child into a potentially hazardous environment, yet her earnest desire could not be easily set aside. She had pleaded with him eagerly, insisting that she wanted to tag along and help in any way she could. Unable to withstand her sweet persistence and bright enthusiasm, he had ultimately yielded, knowing in his heart that refusing her was simply impossible. Upon their arrival at the mountain shrine's attached orphanage, they were warmly greeted by the presiding elf priestess. The visiting nobleman explained that they had brought donation funds and supplies by carriage, asking if these could be delivered and managed here, while Marcus noted how unusual it was to encounter members of the horned race in this realm. After expressing gratitude for their assistance despite the orphanage's staffing shortages, the conversation shifted as the little girl nervously stepped forward, heart pounding with excitement. She held out a bundle of picture books she had brought from home specifically for the children. Accepting the gift with a beaming smile, the priestess remarked how wonderful this was, explaining that many of the orphans could not yet read, so having illustrated books would serve as invaluable study materials that she would gladly read aloud to them. Encouraged by this joyful reception, she held up a box filled with homemade treats, asking timidly if it would be all right to distribute the pastries to everyone present. She had spent the entire previous day in the mansion's kitchen alongside the maids, carefully preparing the baked goods after consulting with her father and Marcus about what would bring the orphans the most joy. Though her father had harbored subtle concerns that a direct meeting with high nobility might overwhelm the young orphans, the priestess assured them that everyone would be ecstatic. Reassuring her further, the noble patriarch explained that they had thoroughly discussed the nature of the orphanage at home to prepare her, and seeing how strongly she desired to offer her help firsthand, he was fully committed to supporting her noble initiative. Brightening instantly, the young girl voiced her enthusiastic agreement, while the priestess gave a gentle, approving smile, expressing how sweet and wonderful her gesture truly was. She stood alongside her companions as the gentle priestess warmly invited them inside to meet the children of the mountain shrine. As they walked through the grounds, Wolfgang took note of the modest surroundings, observing a mix of human and beast folk orphans living together while quietly registering how desperately the worn buildings needed repairs. Gathering the orphans together, the sister called out with enthusiasm, announcing to everyone that Lord Zonder and Lady Louise had brought generous donations for them all. As a chorus of grateful voices echoed through the hall, Louise stepped forward with a shy smile, revealing that she had prepared delicious homemade sweets for each and every child. Hearing the word sweets, the children immediately surged forward in a chaotic rush, causing Wolfgang's heart to leap into his throat at the sudden commotion surrounding the young girl. Remaining remarkably composed, she raised her hands and gently reassured the bustling crowd, telling them not to hurry because she had baked more than enough treats for everyone. Moved by her tranquil demeanor, the children fell silent, allowing the priestess to step in and instruct them to form a neat, orderly line to receive their gifts. Observing the quiet queue, Wolfgang felt a wave of relief, reflecting on how rare such sugary delicacies were for children in an orphanage, and considering himself fortunate that a riot had been avoided. Watching Louise interact so maturely with her peers, he was struck by how much she had grown, though his focus soon shifted back to his original task of searching the crowd for young Carl. Scanning the faces of the joyful children, he was unable to spot any boy matching Carl's description, even as the sister expressed her heartfelt gratitude to him for their visit. He stood alongside the gentle priestess, observing the vibrant energy returning to the courtyard. She reflected softly on how rare it was to see such lively smiles, pointing out that many of these orphans harbored painful pasts that often led to despair. Eager to offer aid, He asked if there were any other troubles she faced that he could assist with, but the priestess gracefully declined, expressing her deep gratitude for everything he had already provided. As he quietly pondered the political delicate balance of aiding only this particular shrine, a loud, panicked cry from his daughter suddenly shattered his train of thought. Turning around in surprise, he saw the young girl sprinting toward him at full speed, desperately calling for him to come look at what she had discovered. With wide, glowing eyes, she pointed triumphantly to a quiet boy wearing a hooded cloak behind her, announcing that his magic was utterly incredible. When the hooded boy opened his palm, a microscopic object rested on his fingertip, leaving the Lord utterly dumbfounded to realize it was an intricately detailed, miniature rose no bigger than a seed. The young boy quietly explained that he had wanted to give a small token of appreciation in return for the sweets, while the little girl excitedly clarified that the flower had been normal-sized just moments ago. He admitted that he had picked the rose from the courtyard intending merely to shrink it into a pressed flower, but had accidentally overdone it, leaving the Lord astonished by such extraordinary power. The priestess explained that shrinking objects was considered impossible by conventional magic standards, causing his eyes to widen in sheer disbelief as he urgently asked the boy for his name. Lowering his hood to meet the nobleman's intense gaze, the youth introduced himself simply as Carl, revealing he possessed no family surname. His dark hair and dark eyes immediately caught Wolfgang's attention, matching the sharp features of the notorious assassin from his former memories. Staring closely at the innocent boy, Wolfgang realized without a shadow of a doubt that this was indeed the very same Carl. Intrigued by a secret ability that had never been documented in his past knowledge, Wolfgang quickly processed the immense strategic value of such shrinking magic. Driven by sudden enthusiasm, he called out firmly to the boy, catching Carl completely off guard. With a confident flourish, Wolfgang proudly proclaimed his name to Carl, announcing his grand plan to launch a massive commercial enterprise that would sweep across the entire region, leaving both children gazing at him in awe. Wolfgang enthusiastically declares his intention to launch a massive business venture involving the entire surrounding region, leaving young Carl entirely bewildered by the sudden announcement. He goes on to clarify the true motive behind his proposition, explaining that he had been seeking a way to shrink objects to fulfill a personal desire, making Carl question why a noble of such high standing would discuss business with him. Demonstrating a tiny, miniaturized object floating above his palm, he details how Carl's spatial magic can bring this concept to life, proposing that the House of Zonder officially take Carl in under the pretext of utilizing his rare gift. Hearing this unbelievable proposition, the children of the orphanage gasp in astonishment, asking Carl in wide-eyed wonder if he is truly about to become the adopted son of a count. He stammers in utter disbelief, unable to comprehend that such an extraordinary opportunity could be offered to someone like him, while Wolfgang looks down at him with a warm, reassuring smile. Looking down at the stunned boy, he reveals his deep understanding of Carl's true motives, explaining that he knows Carl joined the Dark Assassin Guild solely to support the struggling orphanage and protect the people of the slums. Reflecting on the harsh reality of their surroundings, he acknowledges how a destitute orphan in the slums had no legitimate means to gather large sums of money, forcing Carl to risk everything through dangerous, illegal work just to provide for his companions. He concludes with quiet certainty that a youth as noble-hearted as Carl would never choose to escape poverty alone while leaving his beloved friends behind to suffer. He offered to invest personally in the venture, proposing that they harness Carl's spatial ability to establish a commercial business that would provide a stable place of work for everyone residing at the shelter. Astonished by such a grand proposal, the young boy asked with wide eyes if his magic could truly build a future where all of his companions could work together. Wolfgang confirmed his intentions with a confident smile, explaining further that as the trade expanded, they would eventually need to discover unique selling points beyond spatial magic alone. He suggested assessing the individual talents and magic skills of everyone in the shelter and surrounding slums to launch new trades, instantly sparking eager chatter among the children who raised their hands to participate. Encouraged by the opportunity, one energetic boy blurted out that he was exceptionally fast at running, while a young girl shyly mentioned that she possessed a talent for sewing. The surrounding orphans eagerly chimed in with their own abilities, from drawing to singing, while the elf priestess looked on with a soft, affectionate expression, touched by their newfound hope. Turning to the priestess, the nobleman apologized for his abruptness, maintaining that establishing a self-sustaining path for these people was far better than allowing them to rely endlessly on donations. He requested her deep knowledge of the local region, adding that they would also need to coordinate with the noble family governing the Haina district to ensure the enterprise operated with full legitimacy. Closing her eyes in thoughtful contemplation, the priestess reopened them with clear conviction, formally addressing him as Count Zonder and granting her full approval. Hearing her warm acceptance, Wolfgang let out a soft sigh of relief as she pledged the complete cooperation of the shrine's clergy, promising to personally persuade any local lords who might harbor doubts about his intentions. She listened graciously as Wolfgang bowed his head in deep appreciation for her blessings, preparing to take his leave from the chapel. Turning toward the young boy, the noble presented an unexpected proposition, asking if he could borrow the boy's services for a while at his estate, leaving Karl entirely stunned. Clarifying his intention, he explained that he wished to formally employ him, offering to become the young combatant's very first patron. Overwhelmed by the offer, the youth stuttered in disbelief, asking if he would truly be paid actual coin, to which the nobleman assured him with a gentle smile that proper compensation was guaranteed. Because he intended to rely on the boy's formidable strength, he insisted on drafting an official contract ratified under the divine name of God Vunold, a measure the priestess readily endorsed. Reaching out a firm hand, the nobleman offered a final invitation to join him, prompting the boy to steel his resolve and give his solemn, enthusiastic agreement. Surrounded immediately by his fellow orphans, the young warrior received a barrage of excited cheers and playful requests to bring back sweet treats from the lord's residence. Nearby, the noble's tiny daughter bounced with excitement, asking her father if their new friend would truly be coming to live with them, receiving a warm confirmation in return. Overjoyed by how perfectly everything had unfolded, the proud father scooped his daughter up into the air, showering her with praise for discovering such a capable ally. Looking down at her father with wide, sparkling eyes, the little girl rejoiced that his long-cherished wish was now within reach, while he lovingly gave her full credit for making it possible. As she watched on, Wolfgang couldn't help but break into a nervous sweat, realizing that Christoph would inevitably give him a stern scolding for making such major decisions without consulting him first. He suggested they set off right away, prompting the hesitant boy to call out after him in surprise. Overwhelmed by emotion, Karl thanked him profusely for his consideration, to which Wolfgang warmly reassured the young boy that he harbored no regrets about bringing him along. Reflecting on his choices as they journeyed back to the Lehman estate, he acknowledged that others might view him as a hypocrite, yet he was determined to offer aid wherever his power reached. Upon their arrival at the mansion, the attentive maids immediately took charge of Karl, thoroughly scrubbing him clean in a warm bath and dressing him in fresh clothes. Once he was completely presentable, Louise burst enthusiastically into her father's study, eager to show off the boy's wonderful transformation. Turning away from his paperwork, Wolfgang greeted them warmly as Karl stepped forward, looking entirely transformed from his former self. Examining his fresh appearance, Wolfgang noted how fortunate it was that they had saved Marcus's old childhood clothes, though Karl felt self-conscious until Louise showered him with bright compliments. Echoing her sentiments, Wolfgang kindly affirmed that the outfit suited him wonderfully, prompting a bashful smile and a grateful response from the boy. With the light-hearted atmosphere settling, Wolfgang turned toward Karl with a quiet gravity, shifting the conversation to a matter he wished to ask him about directly. He watched silently as little Lulu brightly declared she would return to her room, her sweet farewell lingering softly in the quiet study. As she took her leave, he marveled inwardly at how attentive and thoughtful she had become, though the present matter required his undivided attention as Karl waited patiently nearby. Clearing his throat with a slight, embarrassed cough, he admitted that bringing the boy to the mansion under the guise of employment was merely a cover to protect him if he was connected to the Eliolok incident. Pressing further into the investigation, he asked the boy directly if he had recently been hired or recruited by an adult man to help move cargo or perform tasks. The young boy confirmed the suspicion instantly, recalling how a man named Hellman had approached him with an offer of money if he used his magic to assist with certain jobs. Elaborating on the arrangement, the boy described how it started with simple tasks like keeping watch or using magic to shrink packages, though the man's initial warmth gradually gave way to harsher demands. Listening to the account, the nobleman realized why the child had reacted with such guarded anxiety whenever the topic of money had been raised earlier. Though reluctant to make him relive uncomfortable memories, he gently requested that the boy draw whatever object Hellman had instructed him to shrink. Taking up the pen, the boy sketched out the item, explaining that it was originally a palm-sized artifact featuring a beautiful gem at its center, which he had reduced down to the size of a fingernail. Examining the finished sketch closely, the seriousness of the revelation settled over the room as the distinct shape of the object confirmed their worst fears. He listened attentively as the Magic Tower's expert examined Carl's sketch, identifying the depicted item as a state-of-the-art communication tool that had only recently been developed. The researcher explained that the device operates as a paired set, allowing sound and imagery captured by one artifact to be monitored and overheard in real time through its counterpart. Realizing the terrifying truth, he pieced together that if the shrunken transmitter had been secretly attached to Eliolok, an intruder could eavesdrop on every private discussion and strategic secret. The expert confirmed his deduction, noting that such a device would allow an enemy to remotely decipher security arrangements, which sent a wave of shock and murmurs through the surrounding scholars. Because shrinking magic was so exceptionally rare, the entire setup had remained a blind spot for security, leaving young Carl visibly anxious about his unwitting involvement. Sensing the boy's unease, he gently placed a hand on Carl's head, reassuring him that he was merely an innocent pawn who had been manipulated. Looking down at the boy with a confident gaze, he advised Carl to answer all upcoming questions truthfully, as the boy's testimony suddenly turned the direction of the entire investigation. An investigation into the compromised security systems revealed that the area lock devices had all been supplied through a single transport company, secretly fitted with transmitters that leaked access incantations. Reviewing the official reports, Wolfgang calculated that this vulnerability allowed unauthorized individuals to bypass magic barriers with ease, effectively rendering the territory's defenses useless. He noted how the leaked spell patterns enabled anyone possessing the secret phrasing to undo protective seals, prompting urgent warnings across the domain. Recalling past events, Lord Fisher reflected on how surprising it was that a knight like Hellman, who had always seemed honorable, could be mixed up in such treachery. The distinguished nobleman explained that Hellman had likely used magical charm items purchased from black market merchants to manipulate those around him without exciting suspicion. When the first order of knights was dispatched to raid Hellman's hideout and take him into custody, they kicked open the heavy door expecting a fierce confrontation. Upon entering, however, they found Hellman already slain in his quarters, proving to Wolfgang that the mastermind behind the plot was ruthlessly eliminating witnesses to cover their tracks. Distracted from his troubling thoughts by a gentle sound at the door, he turned toward little Louise, who peeked into the room to ask if she was needed. She paused at the threshold with a sweet, curious expression as he asked her to wait just a moment longer. Moments later, the door swung open fully as Christoph escorted young Carl into the study, the boy brightly announcing his arrival and apologizing for the delay. He presented a small box to the young girl, explaining with bashful pride that despite numerous failed attempts, he had finally succeeded in finishing his project. Encouraged by her father to open the gift, Louise looked down at the package in wonder. As the box was opened, a delicate, ornate locket rested inside, catching the soft light as it was unveiled. Demonstrating how the clasp worked, the youth clicked open the pendant to reveal its inner mechanism. Louise's eyes glittered as she admired the exquisite craftsmanship. Resting inside was a miniature portrait featuring her father, her mother, and her current 6-year-old self. Emotions welled within her as she recognized the beloved family together in a single frame. Looking at the tiny image, she was breathless at how it captured her present age alongside her parents, giving her a family picture she had long wished for. Softening his gaze, her father gently recalled how 2 years prior she had asked for a portrait of the three of them, mentioning that her mother surely would have wanted to see her grown as well. Tears of joy welled in her eyes as she expressed her heartfelt thanks, understanding that shrinking the painting meant her parents would remain close to her heart wherever she went. Turning toward her companion with overflowing joy, she called out his name in deep appreciation. Clasping the pendant tightly against her chest, she pledged to treasure it forever, leaving the young boy bashfully brushing off the weight of his magical feet. A subtle blush warmed his face as he admitted to himself how rewarding it felt to know his magic could bring such genuine happiness. He watched as the young girl excitedly asked her father if she could show the newly crafted locket to the maids, to which her father warmly agreed. She darted out of the room with a radiant smile, eager to share her precious treasure with everyone in the estate. The moment the door closed, her father collapsed to his knees in sheer ecstasy, overwhelmed by his daughter's adorable expression while the servants looked on in silent amusement. Composing himself with a quiet cough, the nobleman turned back to the boy to ask how his magic studies were progressing under his current instructors. The young spellcaster rubbed the back of his neck nervously, admitting that mastering the techniques was difficult since tutors experienced in dual-element affinity were rare. Shrinking intricate objects required extreme precision, as complex mana structures easily collapsed, making formal instruction alongside the young lady essential for commercial success. Theoretical research revealed that miniaturization magic belonged to a rare dual attribute combining water and earth elements, a specialized gift naturally inherent to his mana profile. The nobleman reassured him not to apologize for the challenges, emphasizing that the creation of the locket was entirely thanks to his dedication and unique skill. Upon hearing sincere words of gratitude for bringing such joy to the young lady, a rare, genuine smile appeared on the young boy's face. Catching a glimpse of this heartfelt reaction, the Lord smiled softly to himself, pleased with the promising progress in their growing bond. He pondered how mastering magic could benefit Carl, ensuring the young boy stayed on a righteous path and helped the slum, all while keeping Louise's safety at the heart of his plans. He hoped Carl would choose of his own free will to stand by her side. As Carl bowed deeply in gratitude before taking his leave to play with Louise, the nobleman resolved to find a tutor better suited to the boy's rare talents, knowing that solving the slum's broader problems was a worthy pursuit. Once the door clicked shut behind the boy, the elderly butler smiled warmly, remarking on how diligent Carl was and praising his earnest desire to help the impoverished children. Inquiring about their ongoing efforts, he asked for an update regarding the recruitment in the slum district, prompting his faithful butler to report that promising candidates with strong physical capabilities and manual dexterity were already being organized for work. The butler noted that while background checks and education costs were mounting, proper leadership from Carl in the future would easily recover the investment within a few years, an approach the Lord approved so long as the workers received fair compensation. Grasping his head in mild frustration over the immediate financial strain, he flatly rejected any suggestion of drawing from the Lehman family funds, despite the eagerness of others to assist. He explained his reasoning clearly, stating that because this enterprise was his own decision, he would not burden his younger brother with unofficial accounts before his succession, choosing instead to carry the massive endeavor under his own authority as Earl of Zonder. Recalling the generous offers from his allies and the lavish expenses accrued from making countless dresses for his daughter, he remarked with a faint sigh that their household would simply have to practice strict frugality for a while. Catching the subtle smile on his master's face, the butler lightly observed how much enjoyment the Lord was actually finding in the situation, to which the nobleman admitted his genuine excitement to see how Carl and the town would grow. Laughing softly, the elderly servant teased that his master's grand ambitions meant retirement was out of the question, a sentiment the Lord playfully returned by noting that his loyal servant was having just as much fun. He scolded his faithful butler once again for addressing him as young master, but the elderly servant merely chuckled and offered him an envelope that had just arrived. Taking the document into his hands, he studied the distinct wax seal impressed upon the paper, questioning its origin. A surge of unease washed over him as he realized the marking differed from the usual official crests dispatched from the royal palace, a concern the butler quietly confirmed. The servant revealed that this was a private, personal letter sent directly from His Majesty the King himself, leaving the nobleman cold with sweat as he wondered what the monarch could possibly want from him. Standing before the royal court, the young noble knelt with his hand pressed reverently against his chest, listening as his formal audience with the sovereign was officially declared. He looked up slightly as the monarch greeted him with a warm, approving smile, expressing great satisfaction with his presence and dutiful service. Despite the formal praise, his expression tightened with intense anxiety as he wondered internally how events had managed to spiral so far out of his control. His mind briefly sought refuge in memories of his young ward begging to return home, contrasting sharply with the overwhelming weight of the recent monster crisis at the Fisher estate that started it all. Returning to the present, the ruler commended him for discovering the sinister plot at Elia Rock, praising his quick actions that had prevented the destruction of the barrier stone and saved countless lives. He humbly bowed his head in response, but the monarch continued listing his accolades, highlighting the widespread relief brought by his suburban well pumps and his economic reforms alongside Baron Heine. To his utter horror, the king then declared that such monumental contributions earned him the elevated title of Marquis, causing the young noble to freeze in sheer shock. Inside his head, he screamed in desperation, knowing that a higher peerage would force his young sister into the dangerous role of a crown princess candidate, locking them into the fatal game storyline. Unable to contain his panic, he blurted out that he had been working endlessly specifically to avoid such an elevation, leaving the monarch completely bewildered by the sudden outburst. Realizing his breach of etiquette, he quickly adjusted his posture, bowing deeply while sweating profusely as he feigned modesty to politely decline the unwanted promotion. His sudden refusal sent a shockwave of whispers through the assembled court, as the surrounding nobles muttered in disbelief at anyone daring to reject a royal reward. Feeling the weight of their astonished gazes, he broke into a cold sweat, inwardly rationalizing his desperate ploy. High nobility was a burden he could not afford to take on, knowing full well that navigating those grand social circles was an impossible feat for him. Breaking the tense silence, the sovereign graciously accepted the decline and inquired if there was any other desire he wished to put forward instead. Seizing the opportunity to redirect the conversation, he bowed deeply and requested a personal favor instead, an introduction to an instructor skilled in composite element magic. He went on to explain the motivation behind this request, describing a talented young boy he had encountered in the slums during his reform efforts, whose intriguing mixed-element magic held immense promise if properly nurtured. Listening thoughtfully to the explanation, the ruler stroked his mustache, quietly evaluating the request and the noble's genuine interest in fostering new talent. Pressing his point respectfully, he detailed how finding a master of composite magic was far beyond his own modest network, emphasizing that securing such a mentor would directly benefit the ongoing reform project in the poorer districts. Pleased by such a modest and noble request, the ruler burst into warm laughter, gladly granting the favor while agreeing to hold the elevation to Marquis in reserve, allowing him to exhale a quiet sigh of relief. As he withdrew from the hall, the surrounding nobles murmured in awe at his humble posture, while behind the scenes, orders were already dispatched to locate the requested mage. Exhausted by the nerve-wracking ordeal, his only remaining thought was to return home swiftly to see Lulu. Before he could make a clean getaway, Wolf sauntered up alongside him with a smirk, teasingly asking if he had lost his mind by turning down a title, to which he bluntly replied that it was his honest intention all along. He walked down the corridor alongside Mark, who questioned his decision to decline the reward and warned that others might pry into his motives. As they continued their walk, Mark pointed out that his sudden humility had created an awkward situation for the other nobles, who now felt guilty receiving their own honors after he had turned his down. Continuing his calm defense, he insisted that a count's rank suited him best and that others overestimated his capabilities, only to be cut short when someone bumped into his back with a soft thud. The fallen child was none other than Prince Heinrich, the spoiled third prince, who immediately glared up at them in outrage, shouting at their insolence despite having run into them himself. When he was reminded that he was the one who had collided with them, the young prince angrily lashed out, refusing to apologize and brushing off any accountability with childish fury. Behind his angelic exterior, he hid a deeply selfish and arrogant nature, self-righteously blaming them entirely for standing in his path. Observing the boy's outburst, the young lord silently recalled how this prince was notorious for his cruelty, having ruined lives and broken engagements without a second thought in other timelines. He let out a tired sigh, lamenting the misfortune of encountering such a brat in the hallway and quietly sympathizing with the king who had to manage him. Stepping in, Mark openly questioned why a young prince would wander unescorted through a corridor bustling with high-ranking nobles, provoking Heinrich into another defensive fury. Flustered and red-faced with indignation, the young royal shouted that he had every right to go wherever he pleased, completely missing the practical concern raised by the officer. He continued his arrogant rant, asserting that as the future king, the castle and the entire realm belonged to him, giving him every right to walk wherever he pleased while demanding they move out of his way. Calm and completely unfazed by the royal outburst, his tall companion simply asked if that was truly how he viewed the world. Hearing this absurd logic, Mark glanced over with growing anxiety as his companion's serene expression darkened into something far more dangerous. Taking a step forward, the dark-coated noble loomed over the boy with a terrifyingly sinister aura, darkly suggesting that if no one knew where he was wandering, it wouldn't matter at all if he were to suddenly vanish without a trace. In response to the chilling threat, the young prince trembled uncontrollably, demanding to know if he was actually threatening royalty, only for the man to offer a pleasant smile and openly admit that he was. Alarmed by the escalating tension, Mark frantically scolded his companion for taking the intimidation too far, but the man calmly maintained that harsh measures were required to make the spoiled child grasp the severity of the situation. Just then, the sound of searching royal attendants echoed down the hallway as they spotted the prince standing near the two officers. Taking immediate advantage of the interruption, the companion promptly called the guards over to hand Heinrich off, while the prince kicked and screamed, refusing to be captured. While the struggling prince was dragged away flailing and threatening to tell his father, the dark-coated noble offered a refined, formal bow of farewell. As the commotion finally subsided, Mark breathed a sigh of relief, reflecting on how troublesome the prince was despite his charming reputation, though he admitted some good had come from the encounter. His companion beamed joyfully, celebrating the fact that the prince had addressed him with a special nickname, leaving Mark's sweat dropping in shock at how openly he voiced his bizarre delight. He leaned in uncomfortably close, enthusiastically insisting that they dispense with formalities and address him simply as Bebel when they were in private. Caught off guard by such sudden intimacy, the officer recoiled slightly, pushing up his glasses as he asked if his companion was truly comfortable with such a casual manner of address. Smiling cheerfully, the energetic traveler explained how combining his names produced a unique charm, while his companion quietly acknowledged the sentiment. In this land, shortening names or using affectionate pet names was standard practice among close companions, establishing nicknames derived from longer full names. Returning to the matter at hand, he casually suggested that the officer pick a comfortable way to address him, prompting a flustered debate over what title would be appropriate. To demonstrate his point, he dramatically threw open his arms and shouted out the full name over and over, much to the officer's sheer exasperation. Softening his expression, he earnestly confessed that he truly viewed the young officer as his closest friend and wished to be remembered as such. He boldly declared that he had no intention of surrendering the title of best friend to anyone else, leaving his companion sighing in resignation. He went on to lecture the officer about his surprisingly low self-esteem, pointing out that while no rival men were competing for his friendship, countless young noble women were secretly hoping to capture his heart. While he chuckled warmly at his own speech, the young officer stared back at him with an expression of absolute disbelief and utter skepticism. He listened as his companion took his leave, offering cheerful farewells to the representative of Duke Lehman and sending warm regards to the young lady, expressing genuine gratitude for their casual conversation as he stepped into the departing carriage. As the carriage rolled away, he was left standing alone, reflecting on how easily his usual composure shattered around his friend. He wondered if he was truly the only one subjected to such eccentric banter, a habit that seemed to stretch all the way back to their student days. Yet, he could not deny that despite the theatrical mannerisms and distinctive voice, it was unmistakably his old friend. A subtle smile touched his lips as a quiet plan began to take shape for when he finally returned home. With the carriage disappearing into the distance, he resolved to dig through the aristocratic registry upon his return, intent on sketching the familiar face from memory to confirm his suspicions. High above, the vast sky stretched endlessly, bathed in quiet afternoon light as a gentle stillness settled over the kingdom grounds. Time passed quietly over the realm, marking the steady march of years. As those years swept by, young Lulu reached her 7th birthday, while Mark successfully graduated from Craigle Academy into full adulthood, promising an eventual end to the temporary regency. Yet before that freedom could be claimed, the young lord found himself utterly buried under an overwhelming mountain of administrative duties leading up to Mark's official debut ball. Every single detail demanded his direct oversight, from selecting the guest list and seating arrangements to inspecting security, choosing fine wines, and arranging grand attire for both Mark and Lulu. Beyond the immediate celebration lay the daunting prospect of relocating to the Sombart domain, where he would assume his new title as Count alongside his daughter after officially relinquishing the Lehman estate. On top of these monumental future transitions, his daily governance over the slum districts and ordinary territorial affairs continued unabated, pushing him to the absolute brink of physical and mental exhaustion. He muttered in quiet exasperation about shouldering duties that would normally fall to a duchess, until a soft knock echoed at the doorway of his study. Peering timidly around the doorframe, the young girl asked if she might enter, inquiring softly whether her father was too busy to be disturbed. His weary expression instantly shattered into pure delight as he embraced his cheeks, declaring that simply gazing at her face completely restored his spirits, and eagerly invited her to join him for tea. As steaming cups were poured, she earnestly asked if there was any way she could help prepare for the celebration honoring Mark and him, leaving him thoughtfully pondering how to answer her sweet gesture. He considered the matter carefully, weighing whether his young ward was truly ready for such a responsibility before offering her a special role. He explained that Mark's debut ball would serve as a formal introduction to society, meaning every detail of their family's conduct would be closely scrutinized. Her task, he decided, would be to practice welcoming guests warmly and to focus on learning proper etiquette from her tutor. Sitting down together over tea, the nobleman inquired if this grand gathering would be her first experience with such a large evening ball. He reminded her that at the debut celebration, she would be expected to conduct herself as a proper daughter of the Count's family. This brought back memories of her earlier conversation with Lady Fisher, who had gently explained that despite the glittering veneer of high society, it was a world fraught with hidden hardships and intricate social expectations. Returning to the present discussion, he outlined the unwritten rules governing female social interactions, clarifying why she could not simply walk up and initiate a conversation with someone like Lady Emma on her own whim. Illustrating the strict nobility hierarchy, he detailed how Lady Emma belonged to a marquis family, placing her in a superior rank to their own count status. Because of this gap, proper protocol dictated that she had to wait patiently for the higher-ranking lady to address her first. Watching her absorb these complex rules, he reflected on how Lady Emma herself might not mind, but others in attendance would certainly judge any breach of etiquette, potentially affecting her future standing. Realizing Lady Fisher had warned her out of genuine care, he softly called out her name to check on her thoughts. He posed a quiet question, gently probing whether she harbored any desire to achieve the higher status of a duchess someday. Elaborating further, he pointed out that if she mastered her etiquette without being overly self-conscious, she could easily converse with noble ladies like Emma, adorn herself with exquisite jewels and gowns, and perhaps even secure a proposal from a prince. Her face lit up with radiant warmth as she cheerfully declared that while grand parties and beautiful jewels were delightful, her truest wish was simply to remain forever as the daughter of the Sombart Count family, leaving him momentarily stunned by her sincerity. She quickly added with an emphatic pout that if becoming higher nobility meant having to marry that spoiled brat of a prince, she wanted no part of it, proving to his quiet amusement that even the third prince's terrible reputation had reached her ears. Having shared her true feelings, she carefully asked if she could inquire about one more matter that had been weighing on her mind. Her adoptive father smiled in relief, admitting he had feared he was imposing upon her, and warmly invited her to ask whatever she wished. Because of this invitation, she bluntly asked if he had any plans to welcome a new mother into their home. The sudden question caught him so completely off guard that his hand froze midair, his teacup halting just shy of his lips. Struggling to regain his composure, he set the cup down and gently asked her what could have possibly prompted such a thought. She explained that her tutor had mentioned how extraordinarily busy he was, as he was currently handling both the duties of the head of the house and those of the mistress. Continuing her thought, she wondered aloud if it was customary to welcome a new mother when the mistress of the house passed away, asking what he truly intended to do about his own future. Seeing her genuine concern, he softly called her over and patted the seat beside him on the sofa. She brightened instantly and scampered over to sit right by his side. Resting his hand gently on her head, he apologized for causing her to worry about such adult matters. He reassured her that while he was indeed on the brink of exhaustion from work, things would settle down significantly once Mark graduated from the academy and officially assumed his position as the Duke of Lehman. But more importantly, he looked directly into her eyes and declared that as her father, his absolute highest priority was her feelings above all else. He acknowledged that while noble tradition mandated that a lord should eventually take a second wife, he never wished to do anything that would make her unhappy. He leaned in closer, his gaze gentle and attentive as he asked what she truly wished for herself. Prompted by his inquiry, he softly followed up by asking if she genuinely felt the need for a new mother. She fell silent for a moment, her gaze cast downward as she carefully pondered her response. Fiddling nervously with her small pocket watch until it snapped shut, she hesitantly admitted that her desire might sound selfish. She pleaded for him to remain solely her father until she turned 10 years old, explaining that reaching that age would require her to prepare for noble womanhood, a transition where a mother's guidance might be necessary, making that the appropriate time for him to consider remarrying. Clutching the watch tightly against her chest, she reiterated her plea to keep things unchanged until then, prompting him to call out her name softly. She looked away quietly, already painfully aware of how difficult it was in their highborn society to prioritize one's own feelings above duty. He reflected on the unyielding realities of aristocratic life. Once a noble daughter turns 10, she must prepare for her social debut by building etiquette, knowledge, and health, a complex upbringing that a single father could not easily handle on his own. Overcome with emotion, he pulled her into a tight, protective embrace, heartbroken that a child so young felt obligated to suppress her own desires for the sake of the family. Holding her close, he acknowledged his internal conflict as residual ethics from his past life that did not fit this world, while she whispered softly in his arms, sensing his inner turmoil. He softly offered a heartfelt apology to his daughter, pained by the heavy emotional burden she was carrying. Lulu looked back at him tenderly and urged him not to cry, reassuring him that she was not forcing herself or making an unreasonable sacrifice. Reaching out her tiny hand, she sought to soothe his lingering worries. Her sweet, reassuring words lingered softly between them like a promise, reinforcing her earnest plea to remain together until her 10th birthday. Overwhelmed by deep affection and gratitude, he pulled her into a tight, protective embrace on the sofa. Holding his beloved daughter close, he listened as she nestled comfortably against him, her face beaming with a pure, happy smile. The grand debut banquet for Mark was bustling with high society, filling the estate with lively chatter and elegant festivities. He broke down in tears of pure relief, ecstatic that Mark's debut party had finally come to an end after such an exhausting ordeal. He unwound alone late at night, pouring himself a fine glass of wine as he reflected on how the past month and a half had been a blur of relentless work. He clinked his glass against a pocket watch featuring a portrait of young Kathy, quietly congratulating her on finishing her temporary duties. He recalled the nerve-wracking moment when His Majesty the King and Prince Heinrich unexpectedly arrived, an appearance that had nearly made his knees buckle. He had been obligated to send formal invitations across the realm to all 5 major archducal and marquis houses, as well as the royal court itself. He held his aching head, lamenting how he had assumed the king would merely send a representative per custom, rather than making a surprise visit that nearly gave him a heart attack. He reflected on how Prince Heinrich, having been thoroughly disciplined after his past misconduct, had managed to maintain a quiet and polite facade as a model royal throughout the night. Turning his attention back to the small portrait, he warmly praised how magnificently Kathy had conducted herself as a proper young noblewoman, wishing her mother could have seen her growth. His peaceful moment dissolved into a heavy sigh as he pondered the daunting future requirement of finding a stepmother and securing an heir once Kathy turned 10, right as a soft knock echoed at his door. Sitting quietly at his desk, he looked toward the entryway as Mark knocked gently and asked if he had a moment to speak. Welcoming his visitor inside, the elder brother offered a quiet affirmation, prompting Mark to notice the bottle on the table and comment that he had been drinking with his sister-in-law. Settling in for a private conversation, Burnt commended Mark on the resounding success of his debut, playfully teasing him about how much attention he had received from the young ladies, though Mark quickly turned the compliment back onto him. Switching to a more formal tone, the younger man offered his congratulations on Burnt assuming his position, though Burnt flinched slightly and urged him to drop the overly ceremonial title. Continuing his thought, Mark brought up the practical matters of the future, noting that once the succession took effect, Burnt and little Kathy would naturally be expected to relocate from the ducal estate. Hearing this, the elder brother quietly asked if there was any way to cancel or halt the planned relocation, catching Mark completely off guard. He went on to rationalize his request, pointing out that the estate's management would remain seamless under the head steward Christoph, leaving no strict reason why they ought to part ways. Still confused by the sudden reluctance, Mark pressed him, asking why he was bringing up such an unexpected proposal so late at night. When Burnt softly confessed that he would simply be lonely without him, Mark broke down completely, bursting into sudden tears and emotionally begging his brother not to leave. Caught off guard by the dramatic outburst, Burnt caught a strong whiff of alcohol and realized that the usually serious youth was thoroughly intoxicated from his very first taste of wine, wailing hysterically for his beloved elder brother. His tearful display drew a sigh from his companion, who rested a gentle hand upon his head, lightly mocking how alcohol turned him into a weeping child and resolving to keep a closer eye on him at future banquets. Slamming his hands on the table, he pressed for answers, demanding to know when he would ever be considered reliable enough to help with crucial matters like the slum welfare project, a secret Christoph had apparently been privy to all along. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he confessed his anguish over being kept in the dark about matters of great importance, hurt that others had been trusted while he had been left behind. The scholar observed the emotional outburst quietly, questioning what truly counted as important in his friend's eyes. A sudden realization struck the weeping officer, his voice dropping as he admitted he had never understood the burden of his friend's inability to recognize human faces. With a calm, reassuring tone, the young noble explained that he had hidden his condition simply because his companion had been too young at the time, wishing to spare him from unnecessary worry. Protesting that he was no longer a child, and was now even taller than him, the younger man grumbled that such protective behavior had become a frustrating habit. Gazing warmly at his friend, the scholar gently pointed out how he always tried to bear every burden entirely on his own. A memory flashed in his mind of a younger self weeping and pleading not to be left behind, desperate to follow wherever his elder brotherly figure went. Returning to the present, the noble offered a sincere apology for not speaking openly sooner, before looking directly at his tearful companion and asking if he could truly see his face. He stood frozen as Burnt explained how drawing his family's faces allowed him to memorize them, warmly reaffirming that Mark was his one and only beloved younger brother. Moved to tears by his brother's tender words, he immediately gave up on his plans to move out, even as the young prince protested that altering their schedule now made little sense. As the prince complained, Burnt offered a gentle smile, insisting that having his brother and Lulu stay with him would never be a burden. This reassurance triggered a dramatic outburst from Prince Heinrich, who wailed about the unfairness of Lulu getting special treatment and demanded to stay as well, while the younger brother blushed in overwhelming emotion. Overcome with embarrassment and tenderness, he wept quietly, realizing that no matter how much he grew, he remained hopelessly vulnerable to his brother's warm affection. As morning broke over the grand estate, The quiet echo of their late-night emotional conversation faded into the soft chirping of birds. In the brightly lit corridor, little Kathy paused on her way to breakfast, noticing a strange figure huddled near the doorway. There sat the young man, slumped against the wall in absolute mortification over his drunken emotional display from the night before, ignoring the girl's innocent query about why he was missing breakfast. When she kindly asked if his stomach was hurting, he groaned in sheer agony, declaring his deep hatred for alcohol and wishing a hole would swallow him up. Puzzled by his dramatic wish, the young girl brightly offered a practical solution, suggesting that while there was no hole in the floor, he was welcome to hide in her wardrobe instead. She listened attentively as Mark tried to compose himself, quietly reassuring her that despite his clear mortification, he was perfectly fine. Because of his reaction, the plans for moving out were officially postponed until the day of Lulu's true name bestowal ritual, a sacred ceremony where the creator god Eleved grants a true name alongside a magic power assessment. Until that milestone arrived in 2 or 3 years, when every child turned 10, Burnt would simply manage his duties in the Santo Domain by taking business trips once every 3 months. This compromise delighted young Lulu, who ran happily toward the Fisher estate, thrilled to remain close enough to visit her friend Emma regularly. Having accepted an invitation from the lady of the Fisher household, Emma enthusiastically beckoned Lulu to play in the garden while Burnt accompanied them. As the children ran off, the noble matriarch greeted Lord Santer with a warm smile, thanking him for taking the time to visit, while Burnt inquired about the advice she wished to seek from him. Inviting him to enjoy some tea in the garden, her attention shifted toward a refined young woman standing nearby, prompting Burnt to curiously ask about her identity. Stepping forward with elegant poise, the young noblewoman curtsied gracefully, introducing herself as Lena Fisher, daughter of Jürgen Fischer, as she formally greeted Lord Santer. At the formal gathering, Lena bowed politely as she offered her sincere gratitude for the lovely bouquet sent to celebrate her coming of age. Watching her, he quietly recalled how events had unfolded in the original timeline, where a tragic monster attack had injured her leg, breaking her spirit and keeping her hidden away from society. Because he had taken action to attend the tea party and cooperate with Lord Fisher, that grim future had been rewritten, allowing her to reach adulthood without incident. Though it was a secret known to him alone, he had deliberately picked vibrant ranunculus flowers to match the radiant spirit of her debutante celebration. Gazing at her golden hair and striking amethyst eyes, her genuine smile felt like a beam of hope, proof that his efforts could truly alter destiny for the better. Her mother chuckled behind her fan, delightfully sharing that her daughter was so thrilled by the gift that she had even worn the fresh blossoms pinned into her hair for the evening party. Stepping into the conversation with a cheerful grin, Mark proudly added that he and little Lulu had helped choose those exact flowers together. Blushing softly, she expressed how wonderful the idea of using live flowers as hair ornaments was, praising his thoughtful gesture. Changing the topic slightly, her mother brought up an urgent request regarding the upcoming ball at the royal palace, asking if he could step in to support and escort Lena, while her parents hosted visiting foreign dignitaries. Though he offered a polite expression on the outside, panic set in internally. Not only was he famously awkward at social functions, but he barely had enough time before the ball to memorize her face. He listened attentively as the noblewoman explained her dilemma, revealing that her nephew had sprained his ankle and could no longer attend, leaving them without an escort. She reassured him that his presence alone would suffice, serving merely as a courteous shield to ward off unwanted suitors. While considering whether his friend Mark might be a better match due to being the same age, he hesitated, realizing that placing the two young nobles together might ignite baseless gossip of a passionate romance. Turning to young Lena, she bowed her head in gentle apology for the sudden imposition, confessing her deep anxiety and unfamiliarity with grand evening galas. Reassured by her earnestness, he readily accepted the responsibility to escort both the lady and her daughter, prompting a heartfelt expression of gratitude from the relieved mother. Accepting his new role, he privately reasoned that his duties would be simple, acting merely as a human wall to occupy space until Lord Fisher returned to take over. Brushing aside any lingering hesitation, he broke into a warm, confident laugh and assured them that they could rely entirely on him, even suggesting Bebel could step in to assist if needed. As the atmosphere lightened, little Kathy bounded over to join the gathering, brightly greeting Lady Louise and offering a polite welcome to everyone present. Holding up a delicately woven flower crown, the young girl received warm praise from Lady Louise, though she humbly admitted her craft was not yet as fine as Emma's, recalling her awkward first attempts. Turning toward her guardian with hopeful eyes, she timidly offered the floral headpiece and asked if he would wear it, to which he enthusiastically agreed. With the vibrant floral crown resting atop his head, he offered a gentle, affectionate smile, filling the young girl's heart with unbridled joy as she beamed brightly at his side. He takes in the lively atmosphere of the grand ballroom, where finely dressed noblewomen laugh behind their fans, utterly engrossed in social gossip. As Mark bids him farewell to mingle elsewhere, a wave of restless whispers spreads through the surrounding crowd, with guests recognizing him as the young Count Santa who solved the recent major incident. Overwhelmed by the barrage of staring eyes and speculative rumors, he resolves to maintain his composure and brush it all off, inwardly lamenting his dislike for formal galas and longing to return home to Kathy. Having previously confirmed the arrival of the Fisher household, his attention is drawn to Lady Lena as she makes her radiant entry into the venue, commanding everyone's admiration. Recalling how every man in the room was captivated by her presence, he reflects on Mark's explanation that Lena was top of her class and a 3-time beauty contest winner, confirming that her need for a reliable escort is entirely justified. With some time left before his scheduled meeting with her, he decides to find a quiet spot for a light bite, only to notice 2 figures conversing down the grand hallway. Turning toward them, he is surprised when Bebel turns around and enthusiastically calls out his name upon recognizing him. Astonished as Bebel presents a detailed sketch of his true unmasked visage, he asks in disbelief how Bebel managed to identify him, to which Bebel proudly boasts that spending a full year studying noble registries to draw, it was well worth the reaction. Deeply touched by his friend using his secret moniker Walter, he beams with genuine joy, declaring that this single moment has already made attending the ball entirely worthwhile. Noticing the young woman Bebel had left standing aside, he wonders if this is the first time his companion has ever brought a lady along, prompting Bebel's younger sister, Beatrix, to introduce herself graciously and explain that she is already well aware of Count Santa from her brother's endless stories. She stood gracefully beside her brother as he introduced himself to Lord Burnt and formally presented her. With a playful smile, she quickly checked her brother's enthusiasm, teasingly reminding him that she was already betrothed to another. He laughed off her warning with boisterous cheer, declaring that as a close friend, he would welcome Burnt falling completely for his sister. His bold claim left Burnt thoroughly flustered, protesting against such wild nonsense. Watching the lively back and forth between the 2 young men, she let out a soft chuckle, amused by how genuinely fond her brother was of Lord Santa. As they gathered near the banquet table, she elaborated on her background, explaining that she had been studying abroad in Tyndall when a fateful encounter led to her engagement. Having only recently returned home, it was natural they had not crossed paths until now. Expressing his polite congratulations, Burnt inquired about her prospective husband, only to freeze when she brightly revealed that her fiancé was 9 years her junior. Doing the quick math in his head, Burnt realized that during her student years, her intended would have been under 10 years old, making him quietly question the nature of this so-called fateful meeting. Sensing his bewilderment, Wolfgang stepped in to clarify that his sister's betrothed belonged to the noble dragon folk. The mention of this legendary race instantly brought clarity to Burnt, explaining the unusual circumstances. Unlike human beings, the dragon folk possessed a lifespan more than double that of mortals, complete with a vastly different progression of growth and age counting. Furthermore, kingdom law required noble dragon folk to contract marriage around early youth, explaining why her fiancé appeared so young by human standards. Wolfgang added with genuine warmth that seeing his sister so happy brought him complete peace of mind. Turning the conversation back toward his companion, he casually asked about Burnt's own marital status, noting that despite all the noble chatter, he had yet to hear a single rumor regarding Burnt taking a bride. He fell quiet, inwardly reflecting on the strict traditions of high society. In their social circle, 30 was considered the maximum suitable age for a nobleman to marry, meaning that both he and Bebel, being of the same age, would soon have to resolve their own marital obligations. Closing his eyes with a wistful, understanding smile, Bebel softly confessed that he was well aware of the duty hanging over him, quietly acknowledging that it was a reality he could not avoid forever. Before he could dwell further on the conversation, an out-of-breath noble rushed over, frantically calling out to Burnt. Surprised by the sudden approach, Burnt asked Lord Fisher why he was in such a hurry, noting that it was still far too early for his scheduled meeting with his daughter, Lena. However, Lord Fisher, gasping for air, desperately inquired if he had seen Lena anywhere. Taken aback by the question, Burnt turned to his companion, who confirmed that they had been together since the reception began and had not spotted the young lady anywhere in the vicinity. Lord Fisher grew increasingly distraught, explaining that Lena had been by their side just moments before, but in the brief instant he turned his eyes away, she had completely vanished into the crowded hall. A sudden wave of panic ripples through the crowded ballroom as Lord Fisher breathlessly reveals that his daughter, Lena, has vanished after stepping away for only a short moment. Hearing the news, Burnt and his companions exchange grave looks, realizing that a quiet crisis is unfolding amidst the celebration. She urgently adds that she searched the restrooms and lounges twice over, but found no trace of her anywhere. Burnt calmly asks for the exact details of her disappearance, and the distressed mother explains that Lena had stepped away to the restroom alone while they were engrossed in conversation with friends. He chimes in to explain that when he went to meet her, the corridor was entirely empty, and his worry grew as time passed without any sign of her return. She firmly insists that her daughter would never simply walk away without telling them, convincing her that something terrible must have happened. Seeing her overcome with guilt as she laments not staying by Lena's side at an unfamiliar evening gala, Burnt listens attentively, his dark eyes sharp with quiet determination. He gently reminds the distressed father that their scheduled guest of honor is due to arrive very soon, causing the nobleman to hesitate, torn between his formal obligations and the fate of his child. Stepping forward to take control of the situation, he and Wolf propose handling the search themselves, warning that raising a public alarm could harm Lena's reputation, while Beatrix eagerly offers her support as well. She notes that having just greeted Lena earlier, her face is fresh in her memory, and suggests discreetly informing the royal guards to conduct a low-profile search across the venue. Overwhelmed with relief and gratitude, the desperate parents look upon the young allies, and Lord Fisher deeply bows, fervently pleading with Burnt and Beatrix to bring his precious daughter back safely. Instructing his wife to greet the guest of honor at the entrance while he quietly joins the effort, the gathering hums with subdued activity as the clandestine search for the missing noblewoman begins. Her distinct dress and appearance were still fresh in Burnt's mind, allowing him to quietly inform a royal knight of the situation without drawing unwanted attention. While the guards began their rounds, Bebel took responsibility for searching the indoor venues, focusing on spaces that were normally difficult for men to enter among the female guests. Meanwhile, Burnt took it upon himself to search the expansive castle gardens, though the sheer scale of the evening gala and the dense crowd left him momentarily unsure of where the garden exits were. Praying from the bottom of his heart that she was safe, he stepped out into the night air, only to find the secluded stone pathways filled with couples seeking privacy. His sudden intrusion into the shadows startled a nearby couple, causing the young woman to shriek in surprise as the young man recoiled. He raised a hand apologetically and quickly withdrew into the shadows, asking them to pay him no mind while the young noble grumbled in annoyance. Wiping away his embarrassment, he couldn't help but marvel at the lack of discipline among the guards for letting the garden become a haven for lovers, when a soft whimpering sound suddenly caught his attention. Stopping dead in his tracks, he adjusted his glasses as the faint, muffled groans echoed once more through the quiet foliage. A chilling thought crossed his mind as he realized the sound belonged to a woman. He wondered if someone was forcefully covering her mouth to keep her silent. Glancing toward a secluded alcove, he spotted a man pinning a woman against a stone balustrade, chuckling softly as he remarked that being discovered might not be so bad after all. He strained his ears in the dark gardens, overhearing a man coercing a woman before a sharp voice shouted back in protest. Frustrated by the distraction when he urgently needed to find Lady Lena, the young strategist cursed the complete absence of patrolling guards. The thought of such a predator roaming free horrified him, imagining the future danger to little Lulu if this behavior went unpunished. Although his magic eye could resolve this instantly, palace laws strictly prohibited casting spells indoors, leaving him no choice but to intervene manually. Stepping out from the foliage with a weary sigh, he quietly pleaded for the aggressor to yield without forcing a physical altercation. As he closed the distance, his eyes widened upon hearing the culprit address the trapped woman as Lady Lena. With sudden savagery, he grabbed the noble harasser, shoving him backward with a fierce command to get lost. Watching the assailant collapse unconscious against the stone railing, the young officer turned immediately to check on the victim. There sat Lena Fisher, bound tightly and gagged, tears welling in her frightened eyes. Draping his coat over her shoulders to offer comfort, he softly apologized for the ordeal as she gasped in relief. He gently took her hands in his, asking if she was unhurt and checking for any sign of injury. Stunned by his sudden rescue, the young noblewoman could barely stammer out his name as tears welled in her eyes. Unable to contain her distress any longer, she burst into loud sobs and threw herself against his chest, clinging to him desperately as he softly uttered her name in comfort. Holding her close as her weeping gradually subsided, he validated her terror, reassuring her that the danger had passed and offering to lead her safely back to her mother and father. Bebel lets out a low groan of discomfort as he tries to recover, drawing a worried gaze from Lady Lena while Burnt keeps a vigilant watch over them. Reassuring Lady Lena to turn away, the young lord considers their next move, while Bebel mutters about incinerating the offender with magic. Burnt quietly points out that using magic here would not only incriminate himself, but also risk bringing public disgrace upon Lena. His eyes narrow sharply behind his spectacles as a far more clever, non-magical retribution takes shape in his mind. Deciding that a public humiliation is a fitting punishment, he steps over to the unconscious attacker and unfastens his belt. With a swift, uncompromising tug, he yanks the culprit's trousers down to his knees, stripping the man of all dignity. Seeing this, Bebel breaks into a playful grin, remarking that summoning the patrol knights now will catch the scoundrel in a thoroughly shameful state, while Burnt observes the pathetic sight with calm disdain. Turning his attention back to Lady Lena, he gently suggests relocating before onlookers arrive, asking if she is able to stand. She looks down with a flushed, apologetic expression, her voice trembling as she admits her legs are still far too weak from the ordeal to support her weight. Understanding her plight, he offers a soft apology for asking and politely requests her permission to carry her. Without a moment's hesitation, he lifts her gracefully into his arms in a bridal carry, leaving her gasping in quiet astonishment at his effortless chivalry. Holding her securely in his arms, he gently reassured the shaken noblewoman, advising her to bury her face against his shoulder so no onlookers would recognize her distress. Outside in the quiet estate gardens, guards stood posted along the illuminated pathways, calling out to the nearby royal guards. Burnt revealed his identity, prompting the men to immediately recognize both him and Lady Lena in his arms. He instructed the guards to apprehend the violent attacker unconscious near the gazebo before he could awaken and flee, sending the soldiers springing into action. Escorting them toward a private lounge, an officer offered to notify Marquis and Marchioness Fisher of their daughter's safety, for which Burnt voiced his appreciation. Upon hearing the alarming news, Lady Lena's distraught mother gasped in shock as she rushed toward her daughter. Embracing Lena tightly, the tearful Marchioness apologized repeatedly for leaving her side, while Burnt observed the emotional reunion from a respectful distance. Stepping out into the corridor, Burnt waited politely outside as requested by the guards while the family reconnected inside. Lena's mother expressed her overwhelming gratitude for his quick actions, to which Burnt humbly apologized for not reaching Lena sooner to spare her from terror. He listened with quiet composure as Lady Lena recounted the sheer relief that washed over her the moment she saw his face coming to her rescue. Looking up at him with a warm, genuine smile, she offered her heartfelt thanks, declaring that he was truly her savior. Hearing her steady tone, He quietly noted to himself that her voice was no longer trembling with the terror that had gripped her moments before. When the Marchioness pressed him to accept a reward, he humbly tried to decline, prompting her to suggest inviting young Lulu over for a tea party once Lena was fully rested. The proposal delighted them both, especially when he revealed just how deeply Lulu admired Lady Lena from afar. Softening with a gentle smile, Lena expressed her sincere happiness, declaring that having the sweet child as a guest would be a delight rather than a mere gesture of thanks. Outside the grand estate, as the night settled over the quiet grounds, the Marchioness assured him that an invitation would be dispatched without fail. Stepping through the archway, he considered how valuable an opportunity a tea party hosted by a ducal family would be for Lulu's social education and growth. Imagining how thrilled the young girl would be by the news, his thoughts were suddenly interrupted as Bebel greeted him warmly nearby. As guards escorted the captured intruder away in the background, Bebel lightly teased him about his heroic performance, though he modestly downplayed the accomplishment. As the initial chaos subsided, his colleague thoughtfully pointed out that he had barely eaten during the incident, offering him a quiet room nearby where light refreshments had been prepared. The officer reminded him that neither of them could leave until the royal guard completed their official questioning, causing a sudden wave of dismay to wash over his face. Panicking at the thought of a lengthy interrogation, he cursed the intruder for ruining his plans, desperately wishing to return home immediately so his beloved young daughter, Lulu, could greet him with a warm welcome. Watching him obsess over his child, his companion could only sigh and smile at how predictably doting the young nobleman remained. When he offered his own company as a substitute, the officer loudly protested, pointing out that an overly serious man could never replace the charm of a sweet little girl. Meanwhile, in a quiet guest room, Marchioness Beatrix gently checked on her daughter Lena, offering warm drinks or a physician, but the young noblewoman reassured her mother that she was unharmed thanks to her savior's swift protection. Flustered, she softly confessed that when fear had rendered her unable to walk, he had chivalrously gathered her up in his arms and carried her all the way to safety. Teasingly comparing the ordeal to a classic fairy tale rescue, her mother chuckled, sending a bright wave of embarrassment across the young lady's cheeks. Left alone by the arched window gazing into the night sky, she cradled her glowing cheeks, softly whispering his name into the quiet darkness. Surveying the lush, mountainous landscape of the East Teal region within the Zana territory, Burnt paused as his companion cautioned him about the treacherous footing. In the distance, a mysterious dungeon loomed on the horizon, stirring an eerie sense of familiarity within him. 1 month after the evening banquet, life at the Zonta Manor had settled into a steady routine while Mark tended to young Lulu during a regular business trip. Sitting at his desk, the Lord pondered the passing weeks and the quiet stability of his household. Interrupting his quiet moment, Hansil Devo, a young feline beast man and one of Kristoff's younger brothers, stepped forward with a respectful apology to deliver an urgent report. His thoughts briefly drifted back 4 years prior, when little Lulu had been found battered and collapsed along the roadside, her true origins unknown before she was warmly taken into the family. Returning to the present, the messenger revealed alarming news. An unregistered dungeon had been discovered near East Teal Village. Shocked by the revelation, the Lord jerked back in his chair as the gravity of the situation hit him. The report detailed how monsters had recently been sighted in the surrounding countryside, prompting local adventurers to investigate and ultimately confirm the existence of the dangerous underground labyrinth. With monster surges threatening to breach the village's failing barrier stone, the urgent plea for help left no room for hesitation. Springing into action, he declared that they would set out for the site immediately. He immediately inquired if they could depart at once, requesting Hans to accompany him and oversee the carriage preparations. The attendant readily agreed, hastening to carry out the order without delay. As he prepared to leave, he asked his staff to tidy up the scattered documents one by one. The room fell into a flurry of quick, efficient movement as everyone scrambled to fulfill his requests. A heavy sense of foreboding settled over him. He knew that East Teal was a place deeply steeped in ill-omened memories, particularly for anyone familiar with the world's hidden trials. Beyond the estate, the journey brought them toward the rugged silhouette of distant mountains, where the notorious East Teal Cavern lay hidden beneath overcast skies. Upon arriving at the cavern's entrance, the leader of the escorting adventurers reported that illumination magical tools were completely negated inside, reducing visibility to a mere arm's length, and cautioned him to remain close. As the party ventured deeper into the pitch-black tunnels, she explained the spatial anomaly affecting the cave. No matter how many routes they took to push forward, they invariably looped back to the entrance, all while hordes of monsters surged from the lower levels. Listening grimly, he processed the frustrating reality that they had been unable to locate even the passage leading down from the first floor, completely stalling their exploration efforts. Suddenly, the beastkin attendant twitched his ears at an abrupt sound. The adventurer added that the number of beasts inside was unnaturally high, with many actively cannibalizing one another. A sharp cry of warning rang out as shadows shifted violently right before them. Realizing the monsters were ambushing them from point-blank range, he cursed silently, aware that casting defensive barrier magic would be too slow. Without a second thought, his loyal companion lunged forward with drawn blade, placing himself between the Lord and the lunging beasts to intercept the violent ambush. He listened quietly as his sharp-tongued companion bluntly pointed out the flaw in his special perception skills, noting that without line of sight, his power was rendered entirely useless in such blinding darkness. Though the beastfolk warrior mercilessly declared him dead weight for this expedition, the young lord could only offer an awkward chuckle before an accompanying knight checked on his physical condition. Reassuring her that his injuries were nothing more than minor scratches, he expressed his gratitude to the scouting team for accommodating his request despite the dangers. The female knight promptly dismissed his apology, explaining that their own push deeper into the cavern had already stalled, leaving them no choice but to fall back toward the village to regroup. As they weighed their options, the beastfolk warrior questioned whether the team had fallen under the influence of a confusion spell after repeatedly finding themselves back at the entrance. Dismissing that theory, the observant young noble interjected with quiet authority, deducing that the true culprit behind the spatial loop was a hidden warp trap. Inside the pitch-black subterranean passage, Bernd explained the nature of the spatial traps to the female knight leading their scouting effort. He reasoned that the low visibility and suppressed presence in the dark were intentionally designed to mask forced teleports, instantly shifting intruders across space. Continuing his explanation to the surprised party, he pointed out that these spatial shifts were resetting their progress, repeatedly sending them back toward the entrance whenever they tried to venture deeper. Upon hearing his reasoning, she realized why the monsters had seemed to materialize out of thin air right in front of them without any warning, sound, or scent despite their professional vigilance. The group quickly visualized the mechanics, understanding that the spatial warp had placed the beasts directly into their path rather than the creatures sneaking up on them in the dark. Impressed by his sharp deduction, the female knight marveled that he had figured all this out purely through brief observation, while he nervously wiped away sweat, claiming he had simply read a report on similar dungeon mechanisms in the past. In truth, his mind raced as he recognized this place as an exact replica of a notoriously brutal, high-difficulty cave from a hardcore video game he used to play in his former life. He remembered the infuriating combination of darkness and teleportation traps that forced players to brave every floor for essential endgame items. Shuddering at the memory, he recalled how many times his party had been utterly wiped out in that grueling dungeon, despite the temptation of its lucrative item drops. Stepping forward together into the gloom, the scouting party continued their discussion, noting how surprising it was that such a dangerous dungeon had remained hidden in his family territory for so long until now. Looking down intently at his footsteps as they walked, he explained that by paying close attention to the ground, they could identify the fixed landing points of the teleportation traps and systematically map out a path leading deeper. A confident smirk crossed his face as he recalled meticulously drawing dungeon maps with paper and pencil in his past life, confident that the switch to unlock the next floor had to be somewhere nearby. He listened intently as the female knight reflected on past reports, realizing that spatial warp traps explained the map discrepancies and that they needed to update their survey immediately. She urged them to halt any further reckless exploration, emphasizing that their small party was far beyond its depth, though she acknowledged the critical need to locate and eliminate the source of the anomaly. Adjusting his glasses, he solemnly named the true phenomenon unfolding before them, an out-of-control monster outbreak. In his former life's game, this catastrophic surge referred to an avalanche of high-level beasts flooding outward from the dungeon's deepest depths, an event that players were tasked with stopping to save the kingdom. Walking through the corridor, he warned that rushing into such a dangerous dungeon without preparation was foolish, revealing that he had already summoned the knights of the Lehman Duchy to reinforce them. He suspended all further dungeon dives until reinforcements arrived, proposing instead that they focus on thinning out the monsters reaching the surface so as not to risk veteran fighters like her. Relieved by his pragmatic command, she readily accepted the adjusted plan and expressed her gratitude. With their strategy settled, she pledged her squad to secure the perimeter around the dungeon entrance, confident in their ability to hold the line on the surface. Later at the estate, a young beastfolk retainer approached him to confirm that the barrier stones protecting the village had been successfully recharged, checking if watch duties were complete for the day. Meanwhile, Bebel enthusiastically waved a newly arrived letter from Lulu right in his face, eager to read aloud the news from their young friend. He covered his face to hide a burst of fond embarrassment as he read through the adorable drawings in the letter, moved by the child's cheerful account of her days. Noticing his quiet reaction, his companion addressed him softly, prompting the young lord to reaffirm his resolve to finish the task quickly so he could return home to his daughter. When he casually mentioned bringing mana recovery potions for emergencies, the young man urgently warned him against continuous use, reminding him of their severe side effects. He stressed that drinking such potent drafts must remain a final resort, as night fell quietly over the encampment. 10 days passed while the forces remained stationed outside the dungeon perimeter. Resting inside his tent, the young lord suddenly opened his eyes as an urgent shout disrupted his sleep. The scout leader apologized for disturbing his rest before reporting an anomaly within the dungeon, prompting him to rise without delay. Over those 10 days, Zanta's men and the Lehman Knights had resumed their investigation, yet the relentless increase of monsters had forced them to request backup from elite royal troops. Asking for a situation update, he learned with relief that the elite vanguard investigating the second level had successfully located the monster's nest via magic communication. However, the discovery triggered a sudden frenzy among the creatures, sending a massive horde charging directly toward the dungeon exit. As the urgent warning echoed that a massive horde of beasts was about to break out of the dungeon all at once, a surge of grim frustration washed over the young commander. Reacting without a moment's hesitation, he barked orders across the camp, commanding Hans to rouse every resting soldier in the rear tents so all available hands could form a defensive line. Adjusting his glasses with a sharp, lethal confidence, he assured his men that once the creatures emerged into the open, his scorching magic would reduce the entire horde to ash. At the mouth of the cavern, exhausted guards strained to hold back the tide of shadowy beasts surging toward the entrance, crying out that they were reaching their breaking point as the commander ordered them to hold the line. In an instant, a colossal pillar of roaring fire erupted across the cave entrance, incinerating the lead rank of monsters in a terrifying burst of heat and light. Stunned by the spell's overwhelming force cast without a single spoken incantation, the surrounding knights watched in disbelief while their leader called out for them to mop up any stragglers that escaped the flames. Across the night encampment, the horizon glowed brightly against the darkness, the infernal blaze illuminating the surrounding forest and tents. Watching the destruction unfold from a safe distance, the soldiers could only marvel at their commander's absurd, almost unnatural destructive power. As the shrieks of burning monsters began to fade, the scout captain sprinted over to report in panic that a faction of the horde had broken past their defenses outside the main perimeter. Reassuring her that locating the nest was already a major victory, he watched tensely as fresh beasts continued to charge right through the blazing inferno. He caught his breath as the female knight efficiently cut down the remaining beasts. Beside him, his cat-eared companion marveled at the devastating fire spell, noting how effortless it was to mop up the survivors because the unique magic targeted only the monsters without scorching the terrain, making outdoor combat far preferable to cramped, dark dungeons. Building on their momentum, The knight leader rallied the surrounding soldiers, commanding them to eliminate every last monster and allow none to escape. Approaching his master, the young aide expressed relief that the chaotic wave had finally subsided, while the exhausted noble continued to pant heavy breaths. Seeing his master's visible physical strain, the companion grew concerned over his pale complexion. Adjusting his glasses with a reassuring smile, the young lord insisted he was perfectly fine, attributing his weakness merely to light fatigue from casting such high-output magic. Shifting the focus away from his exhaustion, his gaze hardened with sharp intellect as he addressed his aide, his mind seizing upon a strategic realization. Gazing toward the sky where embers drifted softly on the wind, he pondered the tactical possibilities, wondering if this specialized technique of selective magical combustion could be applied to broader strategic uses.